Arnold Lehman. I would like to welcome you to our special Planning Commission hearing of June 2nd. And at this time, I would like to have roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos?
Here.
Commissioner McDonald?
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Here.
Commissioner Wyrick?
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett?
Here.
Chair Wellender?
Here.
Thank you.
And at this time, I'd like to let us rise to give the Pledge of Allegiance, and I would like to have our Planning Director lead us, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this point, I would like to turn back to my fellow commissioners. Do we have a review and acceptance of the agenda for this evening? I see lots of nodding. It's good for me. All right, late correspondence?
No late correspondence was received.
Okay, fine.
Well, all the late correspondence that was received was uploaded to the document center.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry, I forgot some housekeeping items. I wanted to cancel this evening's hearing because of the Warriors game, but I was not successful. Please do not announce any updates during the course of this meeting. I don't want to know about it. I want to go home and watch the game. So anyway, go Warriors.
Got a football team?
Yes, we'll talk later, Larry. We'll talk later. Okay, this time we have one item on the consent calendar. It's the meeting notes of May 12th. Do we have any reason to pull it off consent?
I'd like to make a recommendation to approve the Planning Commission minutes for May 12th, 2022.
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Barbos?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick?
Abstain, I was not present.
Vice Chair Barnett?
Yes.
Chair Wellender?
Abstain because I was absent.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes unanimously. 4-0.
Okay, and then one other item regarding the public hearing, item 6.1. I would like to have a little bit of flexibility as far as those who wish to come up and speak this evening. So I am not intending, as was the case last hearing, to pay a lot of attention to the 3-minute limit. So you have some additional time, but please be respectful. And if we get too carried away, then I will throw something at you. So this time we're going to go right into the public hearing. 6.1, it is to consider, discuss, and take possible action to adopt a resolution denying or approving a vesting tentative subdivision map for a condominium purposes, demolition design, et cetera, located at 19910 5th Street West. At this time, I'd like to ask for a report, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Wellender and Planning Commissioners. At the May 12th Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission directed staff to prepare findings of project denial for the Hummingbird Cottages project and determined that the project is not consistent with the general plan and housing element for the site and inconsistent with the provisions of the Sonoma Municipal Code relating to project design in the Central West planning area. Regarding the general plan, land use plan, zoning map, and the housing element, the property is designated medium density residential on the land use plan contained in the general plan. It is also located in the medium density residential zoning district on the city's official online zoning map, which is consistent with its corresponding general plan designation. Duplexes and single-family residences are allowed in the medium density zoning district. The property is identified in the City of Sonoma housing element as one of 9 housing opportunity sites within city limits. the housing element contains no information as to the permitted or required densities associated with these 9 sites. The site is correctly shown as having a general plan designation of medium density residential, which is consistent with the general plan. The property does not have a zoning designation of housing opportunity, as was asserted at the Planning Commission meeting. Confusion at the meeting over the zoning of the property arose largely due to the fact that the city's GIS mapping system incorrectly identifies the property along with 7 of the other 8 housing opportunity sites identified in the housing element as being zoned housing opportunity. No action has been taken by the City Council to change the general plan's land use designation of the property. No action has been taken by the City Council to change the current housing element identifying the general plan land use designation and zoning of the subject property. And no action has been taken by the City Council to change the zoning of the subject property from medium density residential to housing opportunity. Therefore, the project is consistent with the general plan land use designation of the housing element and its zoning as shown on the city's zoning map. Accordingly, a finding of inconsistency for the project with the general plan and zoning map cannot be made. With regard to the development code in the Central West Planning Area project design criteria, Municipal Code Section 1926010B discusses the desired future conditions for the Central West Planning Area. And it states the general objective for this area, as expressed in the municipal code, is to ensure that new infill developments respect their immediate context. Single-family areas should remain single-family with regular setback and development in multifamily areas, while having greater flexibility in site design and massing. Should clearly respond to conditions on adjacent parcels. Otherwise, the many neighborhoods within the planning area risk losing their distinctiveness. But this provision is not an objective standard, and therefore may not be used to deny a project. As defined in the Housing Accountability Act, objective standards are those that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and being uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official. The section of the development code I just referenced uses words such as general, should, encourages, but does not mandate specific objective standards. This is a type of development, it is this type of development and or design standard that the Housing Accountability Act condemns. Based on the information provided in the staff report, the project cannot be denied based on this subjective standard. Staff's provided 2 resolutions for the Planning Commission to consider, one that the Commission directed to be prepared at its meeting, and the other an updated version of the resolution approving the project. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution approving the Hummingbird Cottages project, thereby approving the vesting tentative subdivision map for condominium, demolition, design review, and landscape plan applications, subject to findings and conditions of approval. There are 2 minor changes to the conditions of approval. Number 1A should reference the design review plans dated May 16th, 2022. And number 3 should reference California Government Code Section 66452.6 in the event the Planning Commission approves a resolution like those changes to be noted in the motion. Thank you. That concludes staff's report.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff? Mr. Barbos.
It's not exactly a question, but I think it could be helpful if either or both the planning director and the city attorney expanded a little bit on what an objective standard is, why these things are objective standards or not objective standards, because we got a lot of correspondence on that, both people feeling that they were. And the other thing that might be helpful is just for people to get the chronology of our zoning laws predating the Housing Affordability Act, which cut the legs off a lot of city things, and I know staff spent a lot of time going through all these things, trying to get things changed, and this particular one that we're talking about was not one of them. But I think it might be helpful just in terms of the public understanding what's about to occur in this meeting.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner Barbos. The section of law that Wendy read was talking about no discretion on staff, and it's not just the city of Sonoma, it's throughout the state of California. The Housing Crisis Act was adopted, I believe, effective January the 1st of 2019. So we've had it for 3 years, and it outlines a process by which the development community can rely upon the standards in effect at that time or applications that were submitted after that time. With respect to the chronology of things relating to land use in our city, our development code or zoning code was adopted in the early 2000s. And at that time, we were in a housing cycle, if you will, that we're no longer in and have since passed twice now. The most current housing element laws that you see in our general plan, and the general plan, by way of explanation, is a window for the next 20 or so years, and the state of California requires certain chapters or elements contained within that general plan, allows the jurisdiction to add additional elements to that plan, but must have a general plan that lies in sync with zoning. So the two are expected to be consistent one with another. So that if you've got a residential general plan, your zoning must be some form or nature of that general plan designation of residential. The same applies with industrial, commercial, and the like. And under that residential, you can have several types. You can have your basic single-family residential, you can have multifamily, high density, and the like. So general plans are the construct or the document that governs everything else in a hierarchical sense. So in your general plan, you'll typically have a land use element. You might have a traffic or a circulation, a public safety, an open space element, a parks and recreation element. Our city has a general plan that was adopted in 2006, and it contains the mandatory elements that you have, and then maybe a couple of others that kind of add to our unique circumstances here in Sonoma. But there's one of the mandated elements that must be changed every 5 years unless your cycle allows you to do it over 8 years. And in Sonoma's case, we have the ability to do it over 8-year timeline. So there are a very few now, I think, that are on a 5-year turnaround, if you will. So every 8 years you need to update that. So we had a zoning code or a development code that describes a general plan and then also describes zoning. Our zoning was in place and changed wholesale to a development code in the early 2000s, 2003. And we had a general plan that was there at the time too. But in 2006, we adopted a new general plan and a housing element. And then it was in 2015 that we adopted a new housing element. So the housing element was changed and a development code stayed the same, so to speak, although I will say that zoning codes change from year to year or night to night, depending on the needs of the community. In fact, last night at the City Council, 3 ordinances were adopted to change the development code or zoning code as it is. So with respect to where we are today with the development rules, they've changed over the years. In the early 2000s, 2017 era, there were at least a half a dozen housing laws that were adopted. And as I've mentioned again, in 2019, the Housing Crisis Act was adopted by the legislature, which also adds to the complexity of the land use laws that we find ourselves within today. With respect to developments, relating to today's set of laws, if you will, the Housing Crisis Act, or SB 330, basically says you, from this date on, January the 1st of 2019, thou shalt not adopt any new laws that are not objective, and you cannot deny projects. You cannot, and this also goes hand in hand with the Housing Accountability Act, which is another one of those laws I was talking about earlier. You cannot also reduce the density or make a project infeasible. So that three-pronged test there, if you will. So the application that's before us tonight was submitted, I believe, such that the city's inclusionary housing ordinance, the new version, had not landed yet. The requirement, for example, is the 20% requirement as opposed to the 25% requirement. And we're also able to use whatever language we have in our law that's subjective. Up to that point, we cannot deny a project based on laws that we've enacted post-January 2019. I'm not sure if that helps address the question, Commissioner Barbados and Jeff, if you have any other questions. I don't think I addressed the question of discretion with respect to what is objective versus what is subjective. Jeff, do you want to take that?
Sure.
Okay.
Commissioner Barbados asked specifically to compare the Housing Accountability Act's adoption with those pieces of legislation that David has just mentioned, the general plan, the zoning code, and the housing element. The Housing Accountability Act was actually adopted many, many decades ago. It has been viewed as a fairly toothless piece of legislation, but the legislature has seized upon that bill to augment it almost on an annual basis. So that in 2019, under SB 330, the Housing Accountability Act, along with a number of other laws, was amended to require objective standards, just expressly. It just said, it basically said that you cannot deny a housing, it all dealt with housing. We're not talking about commercial projects, but a housing project is defined by the Housing Accountability Act, cannot be denied based upon subjective, non-objective standards. It defined objective. And that definition we've actually replicated and quoted in the staff report at page 3 of 4, the second full paragraph from the top. And an objective standard I'm now reading are those that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and being uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant and the public official. That basically means you go to some outside document, treatise, study, whatever it might be, and you see whether or not there's a standard there that can be applied that's uniformly knowable and understandable and involves no subjective discretionary decision-making on the part of the public official. Classic examples: height limitation, setback requirements, FARs, number of units per acre. It's arithmetic in nature. People have wondered, well, how do you handle the issue of design and colors and style? Well, many cities are adopting style booklets and guidelines and manuals that lay out the kind of styles. Is it California cottage style? Is it mid-century style that's permitted? What colors? And they have color palettes built into their guidelines. They have actual examples and drawings and designs in their guidelines, so you go to an objective source. So nobody gets to exercise any discretion. It's planning by numbers. And that's what has now happened involved in California. The standard that's set forth in our municipal code at section 1926.020 that talks about general objectives of this area are to ensure flexibility and respecting the context. We all have a different opinion as to what that means, and they all may be reasonable. And that's the point the courts are making. Reasonable people can differ, but if reasonable people are differing, that means it's subjective. There's no uniformly verifiable standard that we all can agree to is applicable. That is the defect of that particular standard. And that we need to pay attention to that, because we need to make sure as we update our general plan, our housing element, our zoning code, that we remove from those documents this kind of general guidance as to the nature of the development that the city wishes to achieve in the foreseeable future. In terms of it helps me to understand, and this is one thing that we didn't have an opportunity to do at our last commission meeting. We were getting a lot of new information, as you know, at the 11th, actually the 12th hour. We were scrambling to figure out what was going on. We didn't know that the GIS map had 7 or 8 or 9 sites designated as RO zoning or housing opportunity sites. We didn't realize that was a mistake, that an error had occurred to modify the GIS system map. I didn't realize that when you go online and pick up that map, there's this disclaimer saying you cannot rely on this map. You have to go to the primary source to make sure it's correct. So it was a flat-out disclaimer. And we didn't know that at our last planning commission meeting. We didn't know any of this. So we were all fumbling around and trying to come to a grip as to what we could do based on pieces of information, but not the full picture. We now have the full picture. And the full picture is, in 2006, the general plan was amended. It created a land use plan, which by color and legend designates every parcel in the city as to what its permitted uses are. And that's the only place you'll find that. There may have been some sections of the general plan that may have carved out portions of the city and highlighted them, but in terms of a comprehensive view of what this city looks like, it's the land use plan that's in the general plan. That's where you find it. Now, the general plan has text to describe the uses that this legend and the symbols and the colors in the land use plan indicate are permitted. But what's permitted per parcel is on that land use plan, and that has been considered and called by court after court after court as the constitution of development for the city of Sonoma. It sits at the top of the hierarchy. It controls every other decision that you make. The housing element, the zoning code, you name it, has to conform to that general plan. That map hasn't changed since 2006. Correct me if I'm wrong. It certainly hasn't changed as to this parcel. Correct. As to this parcel, it has not changed. Then came along the housing element in 2015. It's sort of the last formal action that the council took, describing what this city looks like in terms of what kind of housing is going to be produced and where. That's the most recent piece of information. It's the most recent statement from the city council as to what this city is to look like when it comes to housing. 2015, the housing element calls out for this parcel as being a housing opportunity site along with eight others. I mean, it lists them. You've seen the documents in your packet for tonight's meeting. It has a map showing where they're located. It then has a table, H2, that actually tells you what the then existing general plan land use designation and zoning for each of those 9 parcels was and is to this day. And what does it say about this particular parcel? Medium density, residential medium density. There's no RO. In fact, it calls out for parcel, I think, number 8 as having an RO zone and as being opportunity site, housing opportunity on the general plan, which is all true. The 2006 general plan, land use plan, shows 2 housing opportunity sites on that plan. One is, as I mentioned, it's somewhere we mentioned, across from Spark. It's along Highway 12 on the east side of Highway 12. And another one is south of the fire station on First Street.
Just north.
Oh, north. Yeah. So the general plan actually called out 2 in the land use plan. The housing element confirmed, reaffirmed, and corroborated those designations. And nothing, at least with respect to this parcel, has changed since 2015. So, the project that's before you tonight, and it was before your last commission meeting, is consistent with the general plan, is consistent with the zoning. And that's why the staff report is the way it is, and why the staff is recommending approval of this project.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other commissioner questions for staff? this point, then, I would like to invite the applicant to come forward and speak to his project.
Good evening, Chair Willander, honorable members of the Planning Commission, Trent Sanson, DeNova Homes. Very good to see you all again. And thank you all for your time here tonight on a special meeting, especially during an exciting playoff finals for our Dubs, so go Dubs. So as many of you all have gotten to know me over the years with our projects that we've worked on here in town, I know I can be a little long-winded sometimes, so tonight might be the first time I am actually rather brief. I concur with everything in the staff report. I'm not going to belabor upon the details. I'm assuming you all have read from our attorney's letter, YIMBY Law's letter, the correspondence from HCD themselves as it relates to the discussions that was had on May 12th. So I just wanted to take an opportunity this evening to kind of take a trip down memory lane as to where we were last May in 2021 at our first workshop to where we are today. Just a quick refresher, the map on the screen here for you all was the very first preliminary site plan we submitted to the city that we had for our workshop with the Planning Commission back in May 2021. The main feedback that we got from that hearing was to try to find an opportunity for more centralized open space and to create more diversified housing opportunities here, including duets or attached style housing. And I may have had rose-colored glasses on at that first workshop, but generally we felt that the project was received favorably with desire pending some modifications. So based on all that feedback, this was the plan that we then submitted with our formal application to follow to supplement our original SB 330 application, where we did sincerely hear from the commission during that hearing to implement 3 duet buildings, duplex buildings for 6 units to be attached duplex, created that central common open space area, and worked to make sure we were falling within all the setbacks and height requirements as adopted as objective standards in the municipal code. Based on further discussion and feedback with neighbors of Sonesta Villas and other discussion with city staff, this was the other follow-up meeting plan that we prepared after the design review and tree committee joint meeting earlier this year as well, where we wanted to work to soften the southern boundary, where we worked with our civil engineer to move some of our improvements to the north to preserve the existing trees that Sonesta has planted on our property line years ago, so those can remain, as well as incorporating bike racks and some other miscellaneous upgrades to it, including where our Unit 15 we swapped out from a Plan 4, which was the largest of the various plan types in the project, with a Plan 3 to allow us to spread the buildings out a little bit further. So this was the plan that was presented on May 12th to the Planning Commission as well. Following the hearing, we did take a lot of the feedback we received that evening, and out of good faith, we went ahead and worked with our architect to update the elevations for the Plan 4 that backs along the southern boundary, backing up to the existing Sonesta Villas community. Where the farmhouse, we're able to get 1.5 feet off the top of the ridgeline by adjusting the pitches of the roof, as well as on the Craftsman getting 12 inches off the top by adjusting those roof lines as well to help try to bring the massing down from the peak of those roof lines. And we also heard from one of the neighbors that spoke at that last meeting that they didn't feel our colors were bright enough, but we wanted to try to maintain the same overall color palette that we presented before, but we swapped out some colors with the same general scheme, but with a little bit lighter and brighter tones to try to brighten things up a little bit based on that feedback we received that evening. There's been a lot of discussion as to a lot of sentiment feeling that our homes are too large. So earlier today, I actually just went on Redfin, just as that's an ongoing and live and active real estate tool for the entire general public, to look at what's the average size of a home that's on the market today, what have homes that have sold in the past 3 months, and what have their average square footage has been for the entire city of Sonoma. And approximately what we found is that they were between 2,000 and 2,100 square feet was the average on active listings versus sold listings. There's also been a lot of comparison to our project Mockingbird Lane, which had an average square footage of the entire project of just over 2,300 square feet. So just wanted to take an opportunity to remind the commission and the public that the average square footage for our project as proposed at Hummingbird Cottages is just slightly over 1,700 square feet, where when we first presented it May of last year, the average was a little over 1,800 square feet with all detached single-family homes, but now with the augmentation of some of the architecture and the plotting and the duet style units, we've brought that down and created more diversified housing within one project. So with that, thank you all so very much for your time. I'm here to answer any questions. My design team is here available on Zoom as well for some reason things come up. And we do concur with staff's recommendation for approval. So thank you all very much.
What I was going to suggest is to go ahead and to give the public an opportunity to come forward and speak, and then I'd like to call the applicant back up for specific questions. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the public. And please state your name and address, and the mic is yours.
I hope this is going to work. It's coming. Nope. Yeah, it's coming. Good. So my name is Frederick Lucas Conwell. I live at 920 5th Street West, Sonoma. I am one of the adjacent neighbor of this development. I spoke on the first during the first hearing without a mask, so I'm glad to see your face and you can see mine. Before complaining, well, it is going to be essentially a complaint about what's happening here. I would like to thank you for the hard work. I mean, this is a lot of work. We learned a lot of things. It takes a long time to write all these reports and do all this work and also to read all of them. But we learned a lot. So I don't want to complain about the RO versus RM. There's a lot of technical language here. There's definitions of objectivity and what we mean by objectivity. I mean, philosophers have been arguing about what objective means for centuries, so I'm glad we can get to an acceptable definition here. But what I want to mention here, since we have to stay on facts and numbers, this is where you said we have to stay. There's almost 900 houses in what I'm showing here, adjacent houses, so that's a number, that's a fact. And developers and everyone, lawyers, and I just have a PhD in organizational development, so but I can count and do some stats. It's a very simple number, none of them. There are 18 double-story houses, which was built by the developer here, which is also in red here, and a 15 houses project here. So it's pretty much, it's surrounded by single-story houses, which we have been complaining since the beginning. And that was my first complaint when we are here. The property, we're going to see the mountains. Building these two-story houses, we're not going to see the mountain that much. Hopefully we can see the moon, and in the Valley of the Moon, we hope to see it again, at least on some sides of the property. When you take a different view, it's pretty obvious that there are just single houses here. Or if you go in the neighborhood, you see just single houses. There are few of them, again. We may count 20 of them on the east or northeast, but basically everywhere it's a single house development. And you can take other views and you can take it from the streets. I mean, you don't just have to go to Google to see and count. So it's a fact. We're speaking about numbers. And so there is some other technical languages about the subjectivity of what we are saying in adjacent neighborhood. Clearly, I mean, this is out of what we see over there. And just in 2 years, trying to imagine these two-story houses, there is going to be a lot of complaints about what we have done here, and everything around. I'm still surprised there is no other project and developers proposing to build something else. Obviously, if you build 2 stories versus 1 story, the return on investment is not the same. So there are some other developers who may be interested in just a 1-story development. That's my question here. Why cannot we get a 1-story development? Because when you see everything from top, that's pretty decent. When you see it from the ground, not. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'll try to speak up. I have a soft voice. I do want to thank Trent for
Can you state your name? For
Oh, my name is Kim Martin. I'm at 920 Fifth Street West, and I'm the board president for Sonesta Villas. And I do want to thank the planning staff for all their work and the commission for dealing with this development twice. And I do want to acknowledge DeNova's efforts to slightly modify their design to respond to their neighbors' complaints. And thank you, Frederick, for bringing some numbers and some actual facts to what we've been trying to say, because I think you can really tell that the neighborhood is single story. There are two-story homes immediately adjusted. Everything else is single story. And it's clear from the municipal code that the intent was to keep neighborhoods intact and keep them in the character. And we're showing that objectively this is going to change the character of this neighborhood. And it's ironic because it's all being done by SB 330, which is supposed to provide for affordable housing. And there is no, the Planning Commission asked DeNova to put a low, very low, there's none. There's a low, a medium, and a moderate. They're getting 2 exemptions to parking and FAR. And I'm just like, it's this development, the smallest is bigger than the largest unit in our development. And it's going to do nothing for the city of Sonoma's housing crisis. My daughters raised them here, neither one of them can afford to live here. Teachers, firefighters can't afford to live here. And I know that Trent is proud, and I can see this development perhaps in a different area, but it's the wrong development for Sonoma. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Janice Sarston, and I live at 920 Fifth Street West, the neighbor. It has been stated that Sonesta Villa is not opposed to housing, just huge houses. In reflecting how our environment is changing, this gives rise as to how we too must change. I'm saving kitchen water, which is transferred to a bucket for the garden. Also collecting the first cold water of the shower into a bucket for the garden the next day. Then I read in the Index Tribune a report that stated that California water use went up 19% compared to March of 2020. So why am I working so hard to conserve water? Whether the DeNova homes have 1-car garage or 2, there probably will be much stuff stored in this location. We have too much stuff, and larger homes create the environment for accumulation. Last night, I attended a meeting at the Vintage House on trash and recycling. The speaker stated we have too much stuff and we need smaller homes. I immediately raised my hand and invited her to this meeting. For DeNova, a mission statement has too many words, but I have a motto to share which I previously stated, but added a positive theme. DeNova comes, DeNova builds, DeNova leaves. providing a more friendly and sustainable environment for the community. That would be a good motto. Thank you to each section of this project. It has certainly been a journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I don't know if scale is, I'm Ursula Vesela, I'm also a Sonesta Villas resident, newly here. I guess scale is not an objective standard, but scale does speak to a couple of things that I find objectively to be true, and I have the luxury of speaking as a private citizen, so I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a developer. And I wouldn't ask a developer to not be a developer. I didn't, it's left to the rest of us to check that. The developer's job is to create a profit. It is the rest of society's job to regulate that profit to a sustainable level. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm a development officer at Stanford University, and I'm lucky enough to live here in Sonoma where I want to live now because we've changed the way we commute and live and work. I make approximately 4 times the median family income for Sonoma, and I could not afford any of the new homes going up on that site if you approve that. So my question is simply, what kind of Sonoma are we creating? Who are we creating housing for? Is full-time occupancy an objective standard? Is economic and environmental impact an objective standard? I talked to the Audubon Canyon Ranch about preservation on a small scale, and it's not a zero sum. Scale matters. How much space you create between a residential development matters to the birds and the animals that traverse through that. We have them in spades on our property. We are a bird paradise. Right now, they're also enjoying the vacant lot next to it. But if that vacant lot turns into the incredibly dense-looking landscape that we witness at Mockingbird, we'll lose some habitat. And if that happens in multiples over and over again, what kind of environment are we creating for the future of Sonoma? What kind of Sonoma are we building? I'm just curious about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Diane Thomas, 113 Merida Drive in Sonoma. We're all kind of flailing here because obviously we're deeply disappointed in your findings. We've all spent a lot of time and none of us are speakers. So I'm just going to, I did email you all earlier this week thinking that I'm just going to get right to it. Our attorney has found, and the commissioner here has found, that since 2016, everyone apparently was aware, at least by 2019, of this idea of objective standards. Here we are, a little town, very little town, with a planning commission, largely appointed volunteer, and a city council selected, and 900 people, 900 homes, are asking you, why in the heck don't we have objective standards plan since 2019 so we don't have a development like this? That's 3 years where we could have developed something to prevent a home like this going in, these homes. And we're just finding about it today. And I'm very upset about this. A lot of us were kind of waylaid by the pandemic. We all huddled in our houses. A lot of us didn't have access to Zoom, or when we found out we did, half the times the microphones are on mute, or we just didn't know what was going on. And that was the perfect opportunity for developers to go, aha, this is a great time for me to bring a project to a town that basically is caught with our pants down, and I can get this through. And that's what's happening tonight. And I appreciate all of you tremendously for your time and everything you do to help us. But I'm asking you please to do more right now, tonight. Find a way to at least modify this project in some way that meets some objective standard. And one of them is that the roof lines are supposed to be 30 feet or less. But we found out from the last meeting that the elevation of the property is rising 3 feet. So does that 30 feet mean roadway 30 feet, or does it mean the new 30 feet, which is actually 33 feet? That means the fences are not going to be 7 feet from the ground, they're going to be 10 feet from the ground, which means on the southern border, these dear people here at Sonesta Villa are going to walk into a fence line that is as tall as this ceiling. Now, I can't see a mountain view from a fence that's that tall that they've been able to have for the whole time they invested their money in their property to have something like that. And they're counting on our city to protect us from this kind of development. The applicant mentioned that the average square foot of a house for sale in Sonoma is 2,000 square feet. That's the average square footage. He did not mention the price. If you look recently on a 2,000 square foot house for sale in Sonoma, it's well over $1 million, more often $2 million. We have been telling this town over and over and over again that we want smaller homes that are affordable, rentals, we don't care, so that we can continue to live here. And it's up to you now and the city council and whatever we can do as a public to make sure that these standards are in law in our town in black and white, so our attorney can cite them, so we don't have to come back for a second meeting and be utterly disappointed here by this glitch, this oversight. It's terrible. One last thing. I'm sorry. This is a big deal. We're all going to live with this. And I don't think this developer, and he mentioned something very interesting last time, that he's a family business. I'm glad you are. I'm glad you are. But he talked about the yellow roof properties. And I would prefer a yellow roof property on that site than what he's building. That was the generosity. He can explain that more to everyone here tonight. But that was the give back he gave to communities for being able to build larger, more profitable developments. We need a yellow roof community on that site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pardon me a moment. See if I can get this fired up. Oh, it's changed my thing around. Pardon me for just a moment. Oh, here's my speech. It's tiny. My name's Pete Posert. Thank you for hearing us out here. I hope I'm not too long-winded for you.
I'll throw something if need be.
Okay. Well, maybe you'll make a basket. What is a stakeholder in the municipal code? The general objective for this area, as expressed in SMC 1926-020, is to ensure that new infill developments respect the immediate context. This creates stakeholders. You can ignore the other stakeholders at your peril when the objective city codes are on their side. The staff report states that this respect for immediate context written rule is non-objective. That's incorrect. Immediate context is a common term in building and law. It means the conditions which surround a particular site or project into which it should relate and connect in some way. In criminology, it means if a crime is committed in a room, that room, the immediate context is sealed off. In building, it means the immediate adjacent parcels, not 2 parcels away, not 5 parcels away, but the immediate adjacent buildings. That isn't non-objective. It's very clear language. What is the objective immediate context? Objective, as stated by the the legal staff, are those that involve no personal judgment or subjectivity. It is uniformly knowable and verifiable. Well, let's see. The home that I stay in, which is right in this location, right by the pool, is a one-story home. I think. My objective mind tells me that there's a one-story ceiling and a roof. The planning staff would have you believe that there may be a non-objective finding, that there's a possibility that there's a second story on the house that connects to DeNova's two-story buildings. That above the ceiling and the roof, there's a non-objective room up there that might be invisible or my imagination or something I just can't see. It's possible, I'm not sure. Do you think one-story buildings could be described as non-objective two-story buildings that connect to DeNova's buildings? That is what the planning staff's report seems to want to have you believe today. I don't see it. The adjacent buildings are one story, roughly 900 square foot buildings that sell for between $400,000 and $650,000. A 1,900 square feet building, DeNova's $1.4 million, something like that. That is not contextually connected, objectively. You can just see it. And Wendy and the staff, I mean, do you really think you can convince these planning commission members that the Sonesta Villa homes are non-objective two-story buildings with this Kafkaesque city code language and state codes and all that? It's like Kafkaesque here. This HAA is designed to foster low and moderate income development, but you've used the rules of the HAA to build two one-story single-home big houses. Oh, I'm off script. You used to make when I was on the CSEC, you used to have these beautiful meeting notes that described what everyone said in detail, and we would sit around upstairs in City Hall and compliment each other because the meeting notes were so rich. We could remember what each other said and congratulate each other, but here they've just been wiped out. Somebody said something, and we've lost our context of the voices of the stakeholders, including you all. To Trent, my suggestion is you withdraw this proposal. This is not contextually accurate. DeNova Home has routinely done the barest minimum, all outside of the existing building codes. The giant red circle up here in the zoning codes, that the intersection is a hazard zone. It's in the planning codes. The number of parking places at the barest minimum. You've refused to limit the height of your buildings to the barest minimum. You're going to the absolute maximum and beyond. It's a direct violation of the zoning codes. In short, in this rocking, fun party town, people sit around the pool and share stories and have fun. But this isn't going to go your way. The last vote was 4-1, and you got one vote as a participation vote because you tried hard. But this is going to go 6-0. You're not going to convince these people that the one-story buildings are contextually two stories. I appreciate you all, and I seriously thank you for your time here. You've been told by the staff that you're not objective, but I think you are. This is a one-story development. Last but not least, to the planning staff, you've hurt these folks. You just haven't recognized it. The sleepless nights of the folks at Sonesta Villa are countless. The tears shed over the kitchen table are real. As people packed up their belongings, five members of the community, because of this, have packed up their belongings and left town with tears in their eyes. And we miss our friends. You've hurt these people accepting proposals that don't meet the zoning codes. You've hurt them, and you need to be considerate about that. You must meet the this doesn't meet the.
Let's wrap it up, please.
Yeah, you've got to reject this proposal. It doesn't meet the objective standards. Anyone can see it.
Thank you, Pete.
Good evening, Chair Wellender, Commissioners, and staff. My name is Callum Weeks, and I'm Policy Director with Generation Housing. I'd just like to start by saying, you know, I'm not here actually to really argue the merits of this particular project. In fact, principally, I agree with the comments made by Commissioner, oh Lord, I'm tired, I'm forgetting his, Willers, thank you. Commissioner Willers, you know, in regards to the powerful need for more deed-restricted affordable units to support the local labor force. I mean, I don't think it's really news to you that 70% of, you know, the Sonoma Valley Hospital staff doesn't actually live here, which, as I think everyone would agree in this room, is a serious problem. But there's a lot to unpack from the comments made, and I really appreciate everyone being here and providing their comments. I understand it can be challenging to kind of navigate through this. I think, you know, this won't necessarily, I think, be the thing that they want to hear tonight, but I think it's rather fortuitous that we are actually in the process of updating the housing element as we speak. I know Ms. Watkins and the consultant are working quite hard on getting that ready and out and to HCD in a timely fashion. And I think it's important that, you know, I mention that tonight because my fervent and my greatest hope is that we can engage the community, that we can get them involved in this process so we can design the community that you want, so we can create the sustainability, not just from an environmental perspective, but from a social perspective, so that Sonoma and the surrounding communities can carry on well into the future and support the next generations. There was comments made about, you know, concerns about the environment. Well, this may be an unpopular perspective, but I think densifying, I think building up is important. If we want to preserve the WUI, if we want to preserve the agricultural space, the open space that we so dearly treasure, it's important that we densify, that we build up. And none of this is objective. It's all subjective, you know, comments, but I feel compelled to share them. Because as someone on the younger end, I'm certainly looking forward to working hard, living out my life here in Sonoma County. I left, went to DC, and came back because I love Sonoma County and I care about it. And that's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing with Generation Housing. And so I'll just leave you with what you already know, what's been stated by staff, what's been shared with you by public comment. This project is zoning compliant. It is general plan compliant. And therefore, the decision must be to approve the project. And while it is unpopular and while it may cause some distress, I think from this, we can collectively come together and potentially create the future that we're all wishing and hoping for. And with that, I will bid you good night, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Hal.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcia Maycumber. I am also a resident at 925th Street West, Sonesta Villas. I've been there for 10 years. First of all, I do want to acknowledge the very hard work done by staff, done by the commissioners. You've obviously given this a lot of thought already. To Trent for doing his due diligence with DeNova. Everybody's done a lot of homework. I find it ironic that we've heard at the last meeting for the commissioners who were there, that there was a great deal of reluctance to approve this project, knowing the direction that housing is taking, the strong need for affordable housing. And yet we are turning this around. And one of the great ironies I found, since several of us carpool to come here to the meetings, is that unlike most places where you would get a reaction in which the next door neighbors would be screaming NIMBY, not my backyard, I don't want all this stuff, most of us actually would say, yes, we would welcome more people, more units there, smaller, 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 smaller. We're in favor of more. We're in favor of developing that land. We just want it to fit in with everything else. Now, I'll be short on a couple other points here. Historically, the Planning Commission did direct the developer of the Troy Lane housing that's there, that is two-story, to the south of us, to reconfigure the orientation of the homes and to lower roof lines because it's so overhung our one-story development. Please consider more of that. There was a little bit of talk about the environment, the loss of wildlife and bird habitat. Nobody has mentioned the fact that a recent purchase of a parcel that abuts the creek along which this parcel travels, a new homeowner promptly moved in and sprayed the entire creek side that was part of their parcel with glyphosate and killed everything along that, okay? That, you know, that all went downstream. We have requested for home number 15 in the plan to have some more controls to prevent anything happening so that that wildlife corridor has some controls to it for safety reasons. We would appreciate that. So there are small things that you could do, even if you're approving the plan, to help mitigate these areas. So far, there's been pretty much nothing that has been done to address our concerns as the direct neighbors. So what can you help us do to fit in? Because we know you want more affordable housing. How come it is that we can't get it? End of comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mandy Massarelli. I'm also at Sonesta Villas. People have covered most of what I was thinking about, but one thing I want to mention is that I noticed that DeNova is putting in a housing project in Petaluma called McKenna that has 1,398 square foot houses. Well, that's amazing. They can make houses that size. Why can't we have houses that size? It would seem that the city of Petaluma is more convincing in, getting the kind of housing they actually need. Why us here can't do that? Do they have better written laws? I'm kind of interested in knowing about that. And it would be great if they could work a little bit with us to get these slightly smaller houses that people like our principals, teachers, former mayor could afford to live here. I also want to comment on the parking. You gave a concession to DeNova for the parking. That would not affect any of you, but it's going to affect us. We're going to be the ones who will have to hire a contract with a towing service and oversee all the people from Hummingbird that are going to be trying to park in our complex because they do not have enough parking and there's very little street parking. So their workers, their maids, their workers, their friends will have to park several blocks away and walk back to these houses because there's not enough parking there. And I'm also interested why, in the first study session, you requested a couple of things, the very low affordable unit and making the units smaller, and they were able to ignore these requests. So it seems like they just kind of push their way around and don't listen to anything that we need here in Sonoma. And they really don't have that much invested. Some people are feeling sorry for them because of these plans that they've come up with, but they have not purchased the land. We, as a group, have pooled our money to, on a limited basis, hire an architect and an attorney to try to find a way to get this development to fit in better next door. So we have spent a lot more than they have, if you look at the whole picture, just to try to get this development to fit the RM designation, which is multifamily attached units, which is what we need. And it's ironic that SB 330 is supposed to provide more affordable housing, yet they've twisted around the language to put these giant 2,000 square foot houses that nobody can afford except for people from out of the area. So I do hope that you rewrite your laws to discourage this to happen in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. All right, do I see anyone else that would like to come forward? Okay, then at this point, I will close the public portion of this hearing And I think it would be appropriate if my commissioners support me to go ahead and ask the applicant to come forward if we have specific questions, and then we can close it and bring it back for general discussion. You open to that? Trent, please.
Yes, sir.
Anybody like to start, or? Please.
Good evening, Trent.
Hello.
Couple things that you mentioned I just wanted to follow up on. You did mention the average square foot of homes, but you didn't say what geography that was. So that was kind of like an ambiguous statement. I'm wondering if you could be more specific about what geography you were talking about.
The entire city of Sonoma.
Okay. Based on the least expensive of the units at the McKenna property in Petaluma, it looks like $645 a square foot plus is what they sell for. So I'm wondering, like we're all talking about affordability, I'm wondering what you could do that would keep this project feasible, that would allow them to become more affordable. If you were to reduce 100 square feet, that's $64,500. If you reduced it 400 square feet, that's $258,000. And I'm looking at what can DeNova do. I know you're in it for profit. We totally understand that and value that, but you're also our partner and our steward in our community. And I'm wondering what can DeNova do to help us produce something that's going to be more affordable for the buyers in our market.
Hear what you're saying, and I appreciate the question, and I unfortunately hate to be so blunt, but we're just going to have to agree to disagree. From our perspective, we have already made significant concessions, significant modifications since our first day of starting to work on this project, preparing for project advisory committee, making revisions before going to our workshop, making revisions before submitting, making revisions to go to design review commission, making revisions after design review, and to here again now. So I've given you every pound of flesh I honestly can have, and I don't want to beat around the bush on the subject. For this project, I know, has a lot of negative stigma from the residents here this evening. But if you look at the project in context compared to everything else, it is attainable by design compared to, I hate to keep comparing to a project across the street, but it keeps coming up, that we built, Mockingbird Lane. Those are fee simple lots, much larger homes, detached garages, full ADUs with most of them. But again, fee simple with larger homes, larger yards, more private space within each one. Hummingbird is designed through the condominium process, so none of these are fee simple lots. Some of them have no driveways. Some of them have a very small rear yard. And so that creates some less desirability by design through a condominium process than it does with a fee simple lot where someone owns the land beneath them. It's all through easements and airspace and whatnot. So through design and all the other concessions and modifications we've made to date, I have, honestly, I wish I could give more. I've talked to staff about it, but I've done the economic analysis. Taking anything else away from this would make this economically infeasible.
So following up in that, today on broker tour, the MLS tour, there were 12 homes on the market. Only 2 of them were under $1 million. We have a problem in Sonoma, and if DeNova is going to partner with us and help us in our development, we need that to be built into the design process. We need you to be profitable, but we also need affordable housing for the members of this community. And love these people, that's great, put them all aside. They don't exist right now. I'm talking about what the community of Sonoma needs. And what we truly need is houses that aren't going to be priced at $1.2 million and above. And that's what it looks like these are going to be. And that's, I'm sure, a market for some people, but it's not what Sonoma's looking for. I know that we don't have the objective standards that we can put more restrictions on this today. And I thank you for pointing that out to us so that we can get that done. But in the meantime, what can you do to help us with this? What can you do to help the community of Sonoma get more affordable housing? And I'm not talking affordable, I'm talking first-time home buyer, second-time move-up buyer. What can DeNova do to help us with that?
The city could reduce its inclusionary requirements, going from 20 to 25%. Adjusting everything is a huge hit on the economic analysis. You can get rid of your Quimby fees. Our project alone is paying well over $450,000 to the city for park improvements through those Quimby fees. If the city of Sonoma really wants to see more, the developer can't keep making concessions. The city has to make concessions. If we really want to be partners, I've mentioned it last week, we're working on submitting our apartment project on housing opportunity side on Highway 12, where that's going to be high dense, 50 units, multifamily apartment style housing for diversified housing opportunities in Sonoma. But the struggle that we have, and I see it all over the Bay Area, we develop from here to Calistoga, down to Hollister, San Jose, and everywhere in between. We work in a lot of different jurisdictions. And the ones that have the ability for us to be able to provide more of those smaller units that everyone is seeking is to make it easier, more streamlined, to reduce the number of improvements we have to do. This isn't an expensive property to develop. 2 frontages, undergrounding overhead power lines, many different things that come with it. Avoiding and working around a drainage ditch. There needs to be some gives from the city if the city wants to see something different.
Okay, I'll take that the city has to take that into consideration, but I'm still asking, what can DeNova do?
I can't control the marketplace. Sonoma is a beautiful place to live, a highly desirable place to live, and I did not create the market conditions that make it such a desirable place to live, which is why property values have gone up over the past decade plus. I don't control the market. The market dictates itself for all of us to play within. So I can't wave a wand and make the market have the homes go lower short of a recession coming. So I have nothing else to give you. I'm sorry, Ms. O'Neill.
So there's no feasibility with taking the unit sizes down, square footage?
Nope.
And
I've
can you
already
tell
done
me
it.
why?
Cost per square foot and cost of construction is immensely expensive these days. So every little bit of revenue you take away from me increases the cost of construction and just continues to make it more and more infeasible. I've made many revisions and concessions to date to get to where it is right now, where we have ranges from 1,300 to 1,900 square feet in this project. So because Sonesta is very active, we're just seeming to be focused on the units backing up on the southern property line, which are the biggest in the project. But there is diversity, there's variety, there's alley-loaded style duets, there's traditional front-loaded duet styles in there, there's other smaller single-family homes mixed within, so there's a diversity in there. So I think we've created a range within one project. One 15-unit project cannot solve the city's desires and wishes for the greater city at large. It needs to come from policy and objectives, annexing more land in. For example, to go down another memory lane, if you all recall the workshop a year or so ago when we were working on the property off on the east side of town, the commonly referred to as the Doyle property, we were hearing from the city's needs and desires that we needed more density, we need more affordability by design, attainability by design. So we thought we came in and designed a very beautiful condominium project that would have put almost 60 units on that property. But after hearing from the commission of that one, we were told it was too dense, it's too much, it doesn't fit in, despite the needs and the goals to try to provide more. We tried to work with the neighbors next door and some of the other residents in their group that was formed to try to work together, and we dropped that one. I walked away from spending $200,000 on that property because I could not satisfy everyone's needs and wishes and desires. But that one had much more discretion because SB 330 wouldn't apply because it needed to be annexed. So it was at the full discretion of the commission and the council. So if I encourage the city to go through and update its objective standards for controlling future development down the road. And I also encourage, and I know it's a cardinal sin for many in town, but expand your urban limit line, your urban growth boundary. Annex more land. There's plenty of developable land on all sides of the town that are prime to do mixed use attainability by design across the board, where you can get some single family, some townhomes, some condominiums. There's lots of beautiful parcels for it. But again, and I know I'm probably going to be whiplashed here for it, but I just feel like I have to be honest. Our little zoning, general plan, housing element consistent project of 15 units cannot solve all the problems for the city of Sonoma.
Well, I'm going to ask one more time. Why can you do some projects where you have a square footage of 1,395 and you can't here?
I'm not going to compare the development of Petaluma to Sonoma. That's a totally different project, different city, different economics. That was a rezone. So with a rezone, you do not fall under SB 330. So that one, we had to go through a different process.
But isn't SB 330 to your benefit?
It is, in my opinion, I can see from your perspective, it's for the developer's benefit. but I think it's for everyone's benefit because in establishing criterion for following objective standards allows there to be no guesswork or confusion. There's setbacks, there's height limits, there's other design standards that we need to follow. So it creates a boundary of rules for us all to play in the same sandbox together with the same guidance for us all to follow, so there's less guesswork for everybody.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question. I don't know if Commissioner O'Neill's finished with her comments, but.
Go ahead.
No, thank you. And this is actually for Trent, and I honestly don't know the answer, Trent, so this is bad form. Typically, you don't ask questions where you don't know the answers ahead of time, but you mentioned something about 1,300 to 1,900 square feet. Was that the project here in Sonoma at Hummingbird?
Mm-hmm.
But aren't the ranges 2,000 to 2,400?
No, I
So
think.
Can you help me on that?
Yeah, I can pull up my computer if you guys would like. I can show everything. But I think what would happen to the last staff report is unlivable square footage and garage square footage was accounted for. If you go through our design booklet, it's very clear that our smallest is 1,300 square foot and our biggest is just over 1,900 square feet.
And then you would add the garage square footage on the top?
No, you don't add garage square footage for livable square footage because you can't live in it. And it's not part of whenever a home is selling, you never advertise the garage square footage. It's only the occupiable livable square footage.
So where did I read that the units that you're proposing are 2,000 to 2,400 square feet?
That was in your staff report from last week that I corrected during my presentation.
Okay, so the units you're building at Hummingbird are the ranges from 1,300 to 1,900. That's what you meant?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
It's over there.
Sheila, any more? Mr. Burnett.
Well, I've got a few questions that got raised at the last meeting, and we didn't technically review the landscaping plan at the meeting. I don't think we had any discussion about it. And we actually didn't touch on the decisions of the Design Review Commission regarding stylistic issues. So I just want to point that out, and I don't know, I know the basketball game is looming, if not already in process. But if we're going to move ahead with a full-throated analysis and discussion of this project, I think it is probably incumbent on the commission to consider both the landscape plan and the Design Review Commission's decisions in case the decision of this commission is to approve the project. Because if we approve it without discussing those things, they are approved as part of our approval. So along those lines, I mentioned at the last meeting what I felt were some viable, healthy, relatively young, but maybe 15 or 20 foot tall oak trees that are positioned along the drainage canal. I don't like the word ditch, I'm going to use canal. And I would really like to see those trees incorporated into your landscape plan. From my recollection of their location and your treatment, one of them may even fall within the area that you've allocated for common space. I can't say with precision because I don't know for a certainty. Others appear to be along the stretch where you would typically have some sort of curb adjacent to that canal. And I feel that, as has happened often in other places in town, somewhat of a curb bulb out to accommodate the drip line of that tree, and the roots would allow it to remain. And those really, other than what I will bring up as the eucalyptus, those to me are the only viable and meaningful trees on the property, is those oaks along the drainage canal. And to me, oaks are kind of special. If they're treated well, they'll be here for another 300 or 400 years, and many generations beyond those of us who enjoy the town now will enjoy their shade. And I like to honor that possibility with trees. With regard to the eucalyptus, I understand that there is a plan to remove them all. Is it possible, along with the consideration of the oaks, to consider not removing all of them, but to remove perhaps 2 of them? I think there's 4. And when I was out there the other day looking at them, The two to the south are neither as stately or as large as the two to the north. Actually, the very northerly one is not all that large. But the second one in from the north is the most stately of the trees. I know eucalyptus in their own ways are terribly unpopular. I bemoan the fact they're getting removed all over the place, and that they are, from what I can tell, the blue gum variety. Am I right, Ron? They're bark shredders, and so they do drop some bark material, but they don't seem to be as messy as many others that I've seen around town that are older. I don't know what the specific age of those eucalyptus are. Eucalyptus are fast growing, but I'd estimate they're 75 years old or somewhere in that range. And if it is a possibility to retain a couple of those, or even just one, I think it would be a benefit. I think it would be a benefit to the neighborhood. I think it would be a benefit to the wildlife. I think it would be a benefit to the project and produce some added shade in the afternoon for some of those houses that end up there. And so I want to put in a word for the eucalyptus.
You bet. Am I okay to jump in?
Yeah,
Yes,
please.
sir. Thank you so much. Starting with the eucalyptus, I do appreciate the comments, but I also did hear some comments from behind me as well. I'm personally of the opinion that although they are magnificently large trees, in the location that they're in its current state right now, they pose a fall hazard and a fire hazard that can cause significant damage if for some reason they were to get overgrown and lose their root stability and fall over. Additionally, I don't see a feasible way for us to maintain them because as part of our development along 5th Street West, we'll be dedicating additional right-of-way to widen the street, to create that public street parking that would be on the project frontage, which then would move our frontage improvements in the sidewalk into the property boundaries, which falls right in for the future sidewalk continuation, fall right in where those eucalyptus are. So I know I'm unfortunately not able to save those. To date, though, what we have done, John Meserve, our arborist, who is also, ironically, I didn't know it at the time when we hired him, but he is on the city's tree committee as well, and working with him on his arborist report in conjunction with review with our civil engineer. We were not able to preliminarily, based on a tentative map and preliminary grading plans, look at opportunities to really save many of those trees just based on the need for infrastructure, roadways, improvements, and what have you would have compromised the root systems or drip lines of any of those trees. So as confirmed with our arborist tree committee design review recommending removal of them all, that was the original plan. But what I'm willing to do is, as pending hopeful approval from my end for our project, with final grading and improvement plans, I'd be willing to accept a condition of approval along the lines of, to the extent feasible, applicant shall work with city staff to find ways to augment the final improvements and final grading design to see if we can save any of those trees further. It's really at high level. That's why, I emphasize tentative maps, preliminary grading plans. But once we get into the more fine detail construction level drawings, that's where we can get into the details of finding ways to do some tree wells or, adjust retaining walls and grading around them. So I can't commit to specificity to which ones we'd be able to save, but I'm more than willing to work with staff and our design team through the construction drawing process to see what is feasible to preserve through the process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of questions, I guess, in terms of following up on what we had talked about before at the last meeting, the fencing along the driveway of the adjacent development.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that has come to my mind since then is the Lot 15 has and the landscape plan shows that majority of the fencing is not solid, and that at least is based on what I could envision that site plan shows. So one thing that I would really like to see is some sort of condition of approval that specifies that be retained. It will reduce and soften the impact of fencing along their driveway and the development. We had also talked about the idea of you leaving 2 feet along the driveway to soften the impact, although that property is yours. And I'm just going to throw this out here because in the future, as we all grow old and are gone and new people are living in those developments, questions and issues might arise as to who's responsible for what. Oh, that's the back of your house. You're responsible for that. No, so I'd like staff to come up with something to be able to resolve any sort of issues that has to do with that strip. And if possible, I would like to see it landscaped. This is more of a question because we're talking about grading, and I brought this up at many meetings before on deaf ears about the final grade and how we measure height. And I'm just looking at the topography map on the plans. It shows that the intersection is at roughly 67.2 elevation, and the lowest point or the area where the adjacent development is at 66.9 in elevation. So I'm just wondering where this 3 feet is like being thrown out, and also what exactly are you doing? Are you just raising everything up and flattening it out, or are you going with the contour of the land? And if it's possible, I understand that there's so many other code requirements, but is there, when you're looking at this, is this truly a 3-foot increase in elevation, and what does that mean for even our streetscape along the street? Because even people are driving along these streets, and all these homes will be sitting theoretically higher if you are doing that. So maybe you can address that a little bit more.
Certainly, yes, a good question. Thank you so much. If you all have the tentative map in front of you, referring to sheet TM 4.0, is our preliminary grading, drainage, and utility plan. Within that plan, there's various sections around the perimeter of the project showing existing grade and future improvements. Focusing in on, oh, thank you, Wendy. There we go, perfect. So looking at the southern boundary there and focusing in on section D, which is kind of cuts through Unit 14, backing up to Sonesta Villas. That is where it shows that we are looking at the existing grade in that section at 65.9 and a top of wall at about 68.4. So, depending on where you're at along that boundary there, between 2.5 and a 3-foot wall. The reason for the need for that grade change is twofold. The first one is just ensuring that our future development doesn't have any drainage or runoff flow into Sonesta Villas, because that's a big no-no. We have to make sure we're controlling and containing all of our future runoff and drainage. So raising it and allowing us to tip it back in that point where we're improving it is a main focus. In addition, all the existing utilities in 5th Street West and MacArthur are very shallow. So we do need to try to bring up the whole site slightly, just a little bit, to make sure that there's adequate fall and cover for those utilities based on the requirements by the city's water standards, Sonoma County Water Agency, who controls the sewer and storm drain cover, et cetera. So that's the functional reason for why we need to bring it up. But I also would like to point out to sections E and F along 5th Street West and section A as well. It is a very gradual uptick in the grade changes when you are looking at it. So it's not like there's going to be a wall all the way around it where it's sharp edges going. It's going to be a gradual grade change in those areas to the finished pads. As it relates to the fencing, I'm more than happy to talk about different finishes and whatnot along the southern boundary and everywhere else where there will be fencing. It's proposed to be 6-foot good neighbor wood fencing. But if the commission would like to see it softened up where it's 5 foot with 1 foot lattice on top, we're open to those ideas as well. But currently the whole southern boundary would be a 6-foot good neighbor wooden fence, as well as all the private yard area fencing as well. So, but if you'd like to see different fence treatment, I'm all ears.
Yes, and just to continue with the discussion of the fencing too, or we're finishing with the discussion of grading. I appreciate that. That's kind of where I thought we were going, but I just wanted clarification for the members of the public that we're not really looking at a 3-foot tall change in elevation plus a 6-foot fence.
Yes, sir. And the one thing I would like to add is with us reducing the pitches of the roofs, in addition to the 2.5 or 3 foot of grade change, we're now just between the grade change and the heights of the buildings, they're all around 30 feet now, including both of them. But as the code says, you measure from finished grade, so they're all already well below 30 feet now, these modifications, which is the maximum. But also just wanted to point out, when you combine the two now for those concerns, it's still 30-foot-ish.
Thank you. I'd like to be more specific, and hopefully my commissioner will back me up with the fencing itself. I'd like to see, since this is such an important issue for the neighbors, is to look at a different height for a fence and to put a condition of approval that it can't be changed by the future homeowners associations. And I'm also looking at this opportunity. We've already got 2 feet that we're granting for softening that transition. I'd like to see the fences even staggered in such a way where we're taking maybe even another 18 inches and creating a staggered effect so we can create more substantial landscaping, and it will buffer that fence transition. So I'd like to see if we could develop a condition of approval so we're making a more attractive frontage of that fence for those homeowners.
Yes, sir. The only concern I have with adding additional landscaping beyond what we did around the corner, just to soften that entrance and the buffer right there before we get to the trees that were intended now to be preserved for Sonesta. I've heard a lot of concerns, justifiably so, from our neighbors that they don't want traffic or people or access or anything from our proposed future development in their neighborhood. If we were to continue with too much more landscaping down that property line and past where their trees are, it would require us to access through their private roadway, through their property. Whereas right now, where we just have that little wraparound continuation is enough for someone just to be able to walk around the corner and not go through and impede their neighborhood. So I do have a little bit of concern about going that way. I am happy with a future final map to call that area where the trees are to be preserved in that buffer, call it a no-build easement, to make sure that no one else at least from our side or our future HOA could do anything with that within that area. And even put the easement and the benefit of Sonesta Villas for them to be able to do as they wish with their trees.
Mm-hmm. I still think that there's opportunities to landscape and soften that without you having to be involved or the future homeowners association.
No,
there's a way to be able to, it's very common for a dedication, so to speak, to the homeowners association that lives next to those improvements, and then they would be responsible for maintaining them. There's already substantial landscaping, and I'm sure they have a gardening staff. And so I still feel really strongly that we could plant vines, when I'm not talking about very large hedges that will impede visibility, but a way to soften it and a way to provide that as a developer's concession, if you want to call that, to help people feel more comfortable about that fence.
Definitely. Yeah, and with us putting, as we're offering to put an easement there for us to not be able to do anything with it for their benefit, I would be more inclined to allow them to, if they choose to landscape it, because it's never been landscaped to date other than the trees that are there, and I know a new condition with improvements and fence and house behind the fence creates different visibility. But with that offered easement, they'd be able to do with it as they please, to tie into their existing irrigation and their controllers and their water and maintenance and whatnot. And I just think that might be the most productive way to go about it.
I see your point, and it might be helpful then to see if you'd be able to work with the homeowners association. We added it as a condition of approval as an easement, and that they would be responsible for the maintenance and the planting. It would give them the ability to soften the fence, and it gives reassurance that they have, they're mitigating that fence.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'm also fine with it because we always put in our disclosures that if anyone wants to do anything, they need to make sure they consult with the city on local codes and ordinances. So if you want a specific condition saying the fences can't be any higher than 6 feet, we're happy with that, because we already tell everybody you can't just go cowboy and do things on your own without city consent.
Thank you.
Please.
Okay, a couple thoughts. First of all, I'm with David Storer and just looking at the details on the square footage and wanting to make sure that we've got that correct, because we have a discrepancy of about 500 square foot per unit, and I want to get that clarified in the approval, what we're approving. Because are we approving 2,000 plus square feet, or are we approving 1,300 square feet? What are we talking about here? So I can see the two different pieces in here and the report, the staff report from the last meeting, but I think that we need to get that corrected and articulated so that we all know exactly what we're approving here. That's one thought. The other thing is fence height on corners. Aren't we limited to 36 feet, 36 inches?
Yes, 36 inches in the front yard setback and further restricted to 30 inches in a traffic safety area.
So how would that apply on this corner? Because I think that that would be a visibility issue for the residents coming out onto Fifth Street West.
That fencing should all be within the setback, not protruding into the setback.
But I think on any intersection, I think that's in our code, but I'd like clarification on that, because I think we are limited. I remember that house on the street that began with B. Remember the whole issue about the fence height, because they were on a corner?
Oh, that's where they want a swimming pool in front?
Yep. So, and I think that we were limited to, it had to be 36 inches or less because of visibility on the corner. So if we could get that clarified.
Idea for that. For Unit 10, because that's the only one that really has that impact. We'd be willing to move the fence to eliminate that side yard on the left-hand side of Unit 10 and bring it so it just kind of protrudes straight back.
I'm visual, I need to see it.
May I approach the bench?
Sure.
Or can you put it on the screen?
You've elevated us.
Yeah. But I think it has to go on this section as well.
Does it?
So I'm not the expert on that, they are, but
And just to follow up on Sheila, is that possible that we can somehow distill out, either working with the applicant to know what the specific square footages we will be, if we do so approve this tonight? So,
I can show you all page
Okay.
turn if you'd like right now.
well, I think that's just something between staff can work out with the applicant. Or-
Do you want me to tell you what the size of each lot or each plan is?
it's in the report two different ways. And there's one, as David Storer mentioned, where it's over 2,000 per unit.
That's including the garage. So Plan
So-
1 is 1,376 square feet. With the garage, it's 2,007 square feet.
But what I heard from the applicant is, it doesn't matter what the garage is, 1,300 includes the garage.
No, so I'm happy to page turn with you all if you have the design review book. So on sheet A1 is the floor plan for the Plan 1 duet. We outlined just to break down total, because we need to calculate square footages to do for everything, to do FAR and lot coverage square footage, so that's why the extra notes and numbers are in there. But if you look at the table, the first floor is 582 feet, the second floor is 794, for a total livable square footage of 1,376. There we go, thank you. Once you add the garage, which is 477 square feet, and an entry porch of 154 square feet, that's what gets that 2,007 number that was in the previous staff report from a couple weeks ago. But the livable square footage itself is 1,376.
So I think, I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, commissioners, that the thought was to, when you're talking about Mockingbird and those units are being 2,500 square feet, the apples to apples would be a 2,500, for example, to a 2,000 in Hummingbird. I think that's the genesis of the question, was for comparative purposes. So if we've got a 1,300 livable space with a 400 or 600 square foot garage, what's the combined total aggregate of Hummingbird sizes, so they can do a comparison to the other places?
Yeah, the comparison I gave earlier, where it was the average of 2,500 and change, that was just livable square footage. That didn't include the garages, that included
Does that
the,
include the ADUs?
yes, sir.
Okay.
And then same thing going through plans 2, 3, and 4, it breaks it out where the plan 2 is 1618, the plan 3 is 1757, and the plan 4 is 1918.
So can we satisfy that by defining
Yeah,
it as
it's in
livable
the,
space?
in the staff report for the last planning commission. I can tell you it's on page 7, and I just want to make sure we're specific as we're approving this, because it says without specifying what part is attached to the garage, it says Plan 1, 2-story duplex residence, 2,007 square feet each and 26 feet tall, 2 bedrooms, 2.5 bath. Then it mentions the garage. So I just want to make sure that we add in there specifically that the square footage of the unit is inclusive of that garage, so that we're not accidentally approving something way larger than what we intend, okay?
That's fine, because that's not our intent by any means. I don't think I could squeeze any more on there anyways.
Okay.
So if the condition says reference the future construction drawings need to be in substantial conformance with the design review plan submitted, or something along those lines is totally fine.
I believe, and I'll ask Wendy that our condition of approval ties into the design applications
Yeah.
that we've dated, which includes what he's just talked about. And Mr. Chair, when you're done with the applicant, you would need to allow the public an additional time to comment through public comment.
That's fine, and then I'll bring it back. But back to the comment, it seems like it would be applicable just to have the two numbers, livable space X, total space Y, because sometime down the road, it'd be nice to be able to know what size of the units are that are livable space, because that really is a significant factor in assessing what kind of homes, houses, whatever we allowed to be built. So I would really like to see both. I'd like to see the livable square footage, and then with that would be the total, which would be adding the porch and the garage.
In a condition of approval?
In the condition of approval, absolutely.
I've got a question for staff.
I need my shot at Trent. Can I have my shot at Trent first?
Yeah, I just had a quick question.
Oh, for Trent or for staff?
No, for staff.
Okay, go ahead. I'm long.
Was I correct about our review of the Landscape and Design Review Commission approvals as part of this meeting?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, but it's getting back to the fence. It says it can't exceed 3 feet in height within the front yard setback and within 15 feet of a street corner. So just, that's what it says in our code, so.
I'm happy to have it say we need to follow the code, and we'll work with staff to verify. That's fine.
No questions? Okay. I did not have the opportunity to be here last time, so I've got a laundry list, some of which may be just for my own peace of mind, but hopefully it still has some application. I do wholly support my fellow commissioners, Mr. Barnett's desire to keep whatever existing trees we can. I also recognize the difference between a preliminary grading plan and the ultimate construction document. And I would be very grateful that your civil engineer indeed works with John McNair in recognizing what can and cannot be saved, and or what possibly could be relocated for a reasonable amount of money in terms of transplanting. Regarding the eucalyptus, I too am incredibly sad that we're just eliminating the skyline of what I call these significant trees. We lost them on Highway 121 as you go down the cherry tree, and we were losing them on 7th Street East. I just would love to challenge your civil engineer, because it has been done before on MacArthur Place, where there's a huge Monterey cypress, that there was a unconventional bulb out and city sidewalk around it. And we just happen to have a new public works director, and I would love to see his opportunity to be creative with your civil and see if there's just a possibility of, even if it's just ceremonially leaving one, recognizing that it's part of the skyline that makes up this town. So that would be one comment. Just a minor thing too, I was just comparing between your landscape drawings and your civil drawings. The landscape is reflecting a few more parking spaces against the canal, and your civil is showing just two compact, what appears to be compact guest parking, whatever. I was just curious if I'm guessing the civil overrides the landscape.
On the landscape, it's 2 and 2. You might be looking at just with the tree cover on the landscape plan where there's overlap with the fire turnaround areas.
I'm just looking at your TM30 site plan, and it just calls out for compact parking, and there were just simply 2 parking spaces in that zone.
Yeah, and that's reflected on the landscape plan as well, where there's 2 in the southern Street B area and there's 2 on the northern Street A area. The 2 on Street A are right next to Unit 2.
No, I was down by Jason, Unit 9. You know, just saying that the landscape, it's a minor thing, but your landscape illustration shows, I stand corrected. Color graphics got me confused.
It gets me all the time too.
Back to the canal. I know that you have a retaining wall that's running parallel with that canal the whole ways, and I noticed that the improvements stop at the retaining wall. Even though it has been unflatteringly referred to as a ditch, I would welcome the opportunity. I know you have to clean it up somewhat in order to construct that, but I would love to see some sort of minimal landscape enhancement that might suggest it's something other than a ditch. And again, I'm not asking to break the landscape bank on it, but I just think there's an opportunity which would be beneficial both for the development plus the sight line that you would have of the ditch looking southward off of West MacArthur.
I'm fine with that in principle. We just didn't do it originally because as a canal or a ditch or whatever we want to call it, it is technically a piece of infrastructure that if we were to plant it would inundate it a little bit in its ability to convey water. But we're happy to work with Public Works and Engineering to the extent they're accepted to do something right there. That's no problem.
Again, we have a new director. I'm hoping he's really creative and open-minded. And I also just want to reiterate, I support my fellow Commissioner McDonald's comment about a staggered fence line. I have seen that done in the past, and it's amazing how, even if there's not much additional planting, how that just kind of breaks up the visual staleness of just one singular plane running great distances.
Yeah, we've done that on certain projects where maybe it's not 12 or 18 inches, but even with 6 inches, and I believe you're a landscape architect, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some vine species you could plant in a 6-inch setback from the top of a wall to the front of a fence and get them in there to grow. I'm happy with that. That's fine.
And the last couple comments are kind of historic comments. One is reflecting back to Mockingbird. I know that it has been built, and as far as I know, it's been all sold. Originally, when you came before the commission, we had talked about what the target pricing was going to be, and I, distinctly remember it was somewhere around 7, 8, and 100, and I know that I believe it was something like 1.1, and I know that time factors, etc., have influence. But I do want to reiterate something that, because I am convinced without a shadow of a doubt that DeNova is coming back to Sonoma as many times as possible, as much land as you can find that works for you. But I would really like to have some collaboration, whether it's with staff, the city, but before pencil is put to paper, just have some sort of brainstorming saying we do need not affordable housing in terms of big A, because by state law, we're already providing that. But we're really talking about that missing middle. So, and how can it be done? And what allowed, the 1394 possibly of Petaluma, when would it be feasible in Sonoma? Because the need is today, the need is going to be remaining for the years to come. And I'd love to partner in spirit in some sort of collaborative way to try to figure that out. Because I think in the long run, it could be a win-win for both DeNova and the city of Sonoma.
Yes, sir. I think the part that was left out by the public comment was the talk about the range of the homes. At our project in Petaluma that was referred to, we actually have homes that get close to 2,500 square feet. So another very similar range here. It's not all of that one plan, it's sprinkled within. So,
Sure.
And
diversity is good, as you have kind of suggested. And the only other last comment, and it just has more to do with the spirit of collaborating with DeNova, is it correct that through your legal counsel, you've already appealed the project that had nothing that was to be appealed yet?
It was advised by our legal counsel based on the determination from the commission at the last hearing to preliminarily deny the project and ask staff to try to make the findings that, as they've outlined in their staff report, could not be made. So it was advised to protect our rights to just put a preliminary appeal in, but if I put in the description of it pending a different decision tonight, that would be immediately withdrawn.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yep.
I want a collaborative relationship with DeNova, not your attorney.
Yes, sir, and that's why they're not here tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That concludes my comments. If nobody else, that I will heed the director's comments. Thank you, Trent, for your long time.
Thank
I'm
you all.
opening it back up to the public. If the public would like to briefly come forward and briefly speak to anything that you've heard in this last hour. And then a break.
No box scores.
I'm sorry?
No box scores.
Oh, thank you.
I just want to talk a little bit about the fence. I read in the staff report that the fence height will include the retaining wall. So our fence height maximum is 7 feet. So that means if there's my reading of it, if there's a 3 feet retaining wall, then you could build a 4-foot fence on top of that, not a 6-foot or a 5-foot. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I think the maximum is 8 feet. So on top of that 4-foot, they could put an additional foot of lattice.
Not according to the conditions of approval.
Okay, so just no lattice. Okay. And then I just wanted to clarify good neighbor fence. We are a small community. Our homes, it's been established, we're smaller, so we're not offering to have a good neighbor fence there. To my understanding is good neighbor means the maintenance is shared, and I just wanted to clarify that the fence doesn't exist now, and as much as I appreciate the offer to stagger, we don't have it within our means to take on that maintenance of that structure.
I believe that the description of a good neighbor fence just simply means that both elevations are very, very similar. So rather than in the old days, you used to throw up a fence that had, quote, a backside to one side. A good neighbor fence is one where the construction design detailing is such that it basically mirrors the same elevation on both sides.
Okay. And on the board, I have to follow, I have to protect us financially, so I just wanted to say we're not able to offer that.
I just also want to just chime in, since the fence is completely on the properties, the development, they are completely responsible for maintenance and upkeep. So if a fence falls down, they have to rebuild it. It's not on a common property line, so.
Thank you.
I know one commissioner really loves the eucalyptus.
True.
However, they've got to go. They are such a fire hazard. The people that live in Moon Valley, if those trees would ever fall west, their whole trailer park would go up in fire. So, and that one that you're talking about on the north side, I've looked at it when I walk by and it's all pocked and marked, and I think that one is really diseased. It doesn't look healthy to me, but I don't know anything about eucalyptus trees. But I agree with Trent that they definitely are a hazard. His house, I wouldn't want to be living in a house looking out the window with those eucalyptus trees over me. I would get my shade somewhere else. I would not depend on the eucalyptus trees for the shade. So that's just my opinion. You can go anywhere you want and enjoy the eucalyptus, but let ours go.
Thanks for the opportunity again, and I agree with you. I live in a community, there's a lot of people here that are not here tonight, And I want to remind you that on the front page of the Index Tribune on May 18th was the denial of this project by the Planning Commission, and it was a two-page issue. And that reflects a much larger group of people than you see here tonight, else it wouldn't be on the front page. The other thing is that most people, neighbors in my residence, I'm sure have written you all letters about those eucalyptus trees. They're near and dear to our hearts. I'm sorry to disagree with you. We all... You take them on your property. Well, actually, I'm an artist in the gallery, the guild. And yesterday, I sold a very large painting of a eucalyptus tree from two people from San Francisco who said that's what they love most about this community is the California eucalyptus. I also sold a painting of the Leveroni oak tree. And they agreed, they said, that's why we came to Sonoma. So that's just a little aside. But it's an important one because that is, I believe, the gateway to our town on 5th Street is those beautiful eucalyptus. So we all agreed in our little community, because we've had meetings about this proposed development, that we would love to have one eucalyptus tree remain on that property. So I really, really appreciate that thought. And hopefully that Trent can comply with that. The other thing is that I was also at the Design Review Committee, the Landscape and Design Review Committee, and I distinctly remember one of the commissioners saying there that they think that these projects should have only 8-foot ceilings inside, which would lower the entire impact of these roofs. I don't know if that was brought up any further, if anybody addressed that. But there's no reason on earth that you need a pitched roof here in Sonoma. We don't have any snowfall. There's no known reason why we have to have that steep of a pitch. I was recently in Avila Beach. They had to redesign their whole town because of the issue with, the oil and the 76 spill there. And they redesigned some projects with beautiful shed roofs of a very low pitch. They had outdoor decks. They were magnificent. And the one thing I want to say to DeNova Homes, if you're coming back to Sonoma with more projects, I've been in design building for 40 years. The model that you're presenting right now is going to be obsolete in about 2 years. We need far more contemporary building materials and products and style in this town. I know there's one being considered over on, Highway 12 that's magnificent. This is the kind of thing that we're looking for in this town. These little faux cottage little formats we call highway homes. Now, I know that's subjective, but we don't really want that look here in Sonoma. So this is, again, being amicable. You're saying more projects are coming through. We want to task their design group to make something that's far more interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? 2 more. Okay. Then we're going to take a mandatory break.
I want to reiterate again that I don't think this project along the back line meets the objective standards of 1926-010B, and not one of you have asked about that. It's objective standard. Secondly, I really appreciate, Commissioner Barnett, you're asking about the design review board meeting. My memory of the meeting, it's hard to tell from the notes, but I think that the staff report at that time had the existing structure on the building is listed as 2-story, which they amended by the time it got to your desk. And it was under the impression that that was a 2-story building that passed out of the design review. Maybe Wendy could correct that, or you could look back into the report, but at the time of the design review committee meeting, that was listed, the existing structure was listed as 2 when it's really 1 with a high cripple wall for the floodplain.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, Frederick.
Thank you. I'm still extremely concerned that the discussion is not about 2-story versus 1-story. This project has been started for 2-story, and so it's hard to get back to 1-story. But this is a real point. This is a real discussion, not the trees or whatever. This is 1-story versus 2 stories, and capitalism without competition is a problem. This is what our president said recently. There is no competition here. There is just one real estate developer discussing with the city. There are many other ideas to develop for constructing those houses. at different prices and having different designs and many other things. This is just one single discussion with one developer. This is painful. Really. This is painful to get to a final project without any competition or any competing projects. Yeah.
Well, first of all, this wasn't a project that was identified or advertised as a competition. It wasn't a case where they were soliciting, or the city or the previous landowner was soliciting potential buyers where there was going to be a beauty contest. So I don't think it's fair to say that we're only dealing with one and not a broader spectrum. There were other people that were interested in that property that pursued it, and for reasons that I'm not aware of, declined it. So, and in this particular case, the applicant was the one that came forward and came up with an agreement of purchase with whatever conditions, which I'm not privy to. But my point is that it isn't a case where, yes, there are other developers. I'd love to see more developers come in that are willing to build in what I call the Sonoma spirit. But that's not on the docket tonight. And so we're at where we're at. And I do want to just make one other comment before the mandatory break. And that is, we commissioners are very frustrated with SB 330, SB 9, all these things that are coming out of Sacramento. So you can come here, but if you want to be more effective, go and chew out the people that passed the laws in Sacramento. They are the ones that are hog-tying our hands from being able to do our utmost to maintain the spirit and the style and the kind of quaintness of Sonoma. So send your letters to Sacramento. Talk to Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, we will, of course.
Well,
900 houses, 18 houses, two-story, in the middle of one-story houses. This doesn't work.
Thank you, Frederick. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 8:15, and we'll go from there. Mr. Storer, don't tell me I can't do that.
I'm going to suggest that you close the public hearing and
Yes.
then go on your mandatory
I'm
break.
sorry.
Assuming that there's no one of you else who wants to speak.
Can you be quick? Because this is a break of necessity.
Hi, Mandy Massarelli again. I would just like to ask Trent from De Nova, if this goes forward, to please put a sign of some kind that their development is not going to be parking in our area. And I'm also questioning, how can you enforce these people not filling up their garages with stuff so that they have no parking at their house? I don't see any way really to enforce that. He says they're supposed to leave their garages open for their 2 cars, which is literally the only place these people have to put their cars. So, and then, so I'd like to be interested to hear from him on how he plans on doing that. And then also the RM designation that is for this property is supposed to be attached multifamily housing. This, 80% of this development is not that. So it seems that they're kind of pushing the limits there. Thank you.
I am going to close the public portion, and we'll recess for 10 minutes. to turn it over to our planning director for a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make it brief. I just have three quickies. Something in response to some of the comments that were made at the podium. The question of intent behind our zoning code has come up a couple of times. I believe at the beginning of the comments and towards the end as well, relative to the intent of the RM zoning district. And I think it's important to note that it's clear to us as staff that the intent has never translated, if you will, into objective standards or something that we now have to kind of look at that lens. How could you have anticipated in 2003 that we're going to have a law that kind of ties our hands, or that you cannot adopt new laws, for example, that have to be consistent with those objective standards, let alone the fact that you look through the prism of objective standards when you have to deny a project. So in our zoning code, we do have the ability, or a developer has the ability to build two-story single-family homes. It's by right, they can do that, and that's what has been applied for here, with a maximum height of 30 feet. And so that is what the applicant, the developer, has actually requested. And so for us to come about and say, well, we didn't really mean 30 feet, we meant 35 feet, or we want 32 homes instead of 15 homes, that's not part of what this zoning code says. So as we've stated before in the staff report and orally tonight, the project is consistent with our zoning and general plan. There was another statement about this project provides nothing as far as affordability. That is not a correct statement to have been made, because we do actually have an inclusionary housing ordinance that requires 3 units of these 15 to be affordable, and they will add to our RENA, which we've already met. So this is going above and beyond, if you will, not only the 15 units being added to our 137 that we've already met, that we're going above and beyond, and we've still got another year and a half or so to add to that 137, which is our RENA through the 5th cycle. One last comment was with respect to the Housing Accountability Act. As I mentioned, in 2017, there was a particular bill called Chapter 368 of the statutes of 2017. It was called Senate Bill 167. And as Jeff mentioned, this particular law strengthens the Housing Accountability Act by, and I'll quote from a technical advisory from HCD, it strengthens the Housing Accountability Act by increasing the documentation necessary and the standard of proof required for a local agency to legally defend its denial of low to moderate income housing development projects. This is not a low to moderate income housing development project. It's a housing development project that has 3 inclusionary housing units. And this bill, 167, SB 167, also requires courts to impose a fine of $10,000 or more per unit on local agencies that fail to legally defend their rejection of an affordable housing development project. So, yeah, this is kind of a tough set of rules that are upon us in the development world, and we're navigating through those. So I wanted to provide that. My last point here is that we heard a discussion about limiting the use of the garages to allow for vehicles to be parked in there, and a condition of approval could be placed on the project. I don't have a reaction from the developer. I didn't have a chance to talk. I don't know why it would be a problem, but we could provide a condition that requires the CC&Rs to limit the use of the garages to the placement of vehicles therein. So that's something that we can work out with the city attorney's office on the language when the CC&Rs are presented to the city for our review. That concludes my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to bring it back to the commission for further discussion and possible action.
I have a question, point of clarification. It's directed to Mr. Walter. Am I correct in my understanding of the state of the law that the issue of whether subjectivity exists in our section 19.26.020 paren B is moot because the city didn't respond within the 30-day statutory time period?
That's an additional reason why that section probably cannot be used to support denial.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so any further comments? Mr. Barnett.
I'd like to discuss the landscaping plan. If we have no changes to make, then the landscaping plan as proposed will be approved if this commission approves the project as a whole. So if we have questions or concerns about the landscaping plan, which we did not discuss at our most recent meeting, this is the time to do it. So a couple of questions I've got has to do with the bioretention area. And at this point, the schematics say that the plant species per BASMA guidelines are typical. Am I to infer from that that these will not be, for example, as is outside of the apartments that you built on the Olivia apartments, that these bioretention areas will not simply be rock-filled areas, but will actually be landscaped plants? It won't be a pile of rocks? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think for the record, if you want to get a response from the applicant, we need to open up the hearing again. So I'm thinking maybe what we do is we ask all of our questions, have him respond, let the public respond, then we close it again, if that's okay.
That's fine. And I'm assuming that all of these plants are low water. They say they're moderate, some moderate, and some are low water species. I would be interested in finding out if it's possible, and you may not have this at hand, or maybe Ron would know, what the implications are for water use in general with these classifications of low and moderate. In other words, is there a category of planting plans that are below low? In other words, the xeriscape, as I understand it, and I'm, as you know, a cactus and succulent guy.
It's too bad.
I know there's a category of plantings that are xeriscape, which use almost no water or very limited, and I guess my concern is this a planting plan that is truly going to save on water? Let's put it this way. Whatever gets done here, if there's irrigation needed, there's going to be more water used for this parcel than's being used today. And how do you compare what's the baseline upon which one determines what an appropriate amount of water is? In other words, you can't say you have to build a project that uses no water for irrigation, but what's the threshold that we really should be looking at? California is declaring a water emergency of the first order, and
That's right.
and so I would like to get some discussion about whether this is really, if a low water plan is actually enough, given what's happened over the last year or two.
So I can speak not as the planning commissioner, but I can speak as a landscape architect. A project like this is required by the state of California to meet certain water usage requirements, and they have a very, I'm going to choose my words carefully. They have a formula that you have to basically abide by, and so what it has, it's A plus B plus C plus D equals the allowable amount of water that you can use for a project of this size. Then the second equation is based upon the design that's reflective on there that says if you've used, it looks like about 75% low water usage and you've got 10 moderate and you don't have large lawn areas, then you go through the second equation, A, B, C, D equals the projected amount of water. And as long as the projected amount of water is less than the amount that the state of California has said is allowable based upon that site, then they can go that direction. And I think that what I just gathered and didn't do a real serious inventory of it, but I would say that I have confidence that whatever landscape goes in will meet the requirements set forth by the state of California regarding watering a landscape.
Well, thank you for that. And I agree that this developer is too smart to wantonly violate the state standard on water use. My question really doesn't pertain to the letter of the law. It's looking forward in terms of present conditions, and is this actually the lowest water use plan that could be developed, or is there some threshold?
Again, I can speak to it not as the planning commissioner, but as a landscape architect. No, there is a more water conserving design that basically would reflect what you are so passionate about. But as a practicing landscape architect who already does not like Sacramento and does not like my hands tied, but consider myself a very strong steward of water, being responsible for what I design, I wouldn't want to tie his hands beyond what the state is already asking for. Now, he may fall in love with, succulent frontage. But again, I would not be supportive of making that a condition of approval. You can always challenge him and say, in light of the drought and it's not getting any better, to challenge the landscape architect to do his darndest to use the least amount of water. So,
Well, I get that, and I'm not proposing that we set new conditions of approval. I guess my question for you as a professional in this field is, do you like this plan?
My review of the plan is such that it reflects a design that I believe will meet the water conserving requirements, and that I did not see anything egregious that would cause me sleepless nights. However, I also am reluctant, because I am a design professional, to put on the design hat and design this project. So I would just like to think that Donnell will pick a better landscape architect next time when I'm not on the commission. No, just kidding. That's off record, sorry. Anyway, but I don't take it, when I look at and that's just a conceptual plan too. So this is the intent, this is the direction. You saw all the pretty pictures of the proposed plants and the spirit of the plants. I take no exception to it at this point.
Okay, thank you. And with regard to the Design Review Commission's decisions about the design standards, does anyone have any concerns or comments? They did eliminate one style of home. I think it was the mission style. I'm not exactly sure what that implies, but in any event, the specifications, the colors, the light fixtures, the siding materials, the roof materials, all of these things, seemed fairly straightforward to me. I didn't have any great concern. These aren't necessarily the style of houses that are my favorites, but that's here nor there. The question is whether the commission has any further refinements that it wants to make, or concerns that it has about any of the design proposals that have been made. I don't have any specifically, but I want to make sure that we do explicitly address this issue so that when a motion is considered regarding approval or denial of the project, that it incorporates the fact that we have actually considered this.
Yes. So with that, would anybody like to comment further on concerns, questions about the aesthetics, the architecture, the landscape?
I just want to support the ideas Commissioner McDonald suggested earlier on the fencing and the border between the Sonesta Villas and the back of this property.
We'll be mindful of that if a motion is made then. I would like to think, just because we got the answer of cobblestone, that I don't want to open up the public again. And Mr. Walter, will you tell me that I'm not going to go to jail? But I don't think that warranted opening up the public again. No, it did not. Thank you. So with that, I want to bring it back to the commissioners and see if we have further comment or we can take some action.
Through the chair, I've drafted some conditions you may or may not want to consider. Can I summarize them for you?
Absolutely.
To the extent feasible, the applicant will work with city staff to preserve the existing oak trees. We'll add the living area and the total square footage area to the conditions of approval. Condition of approval number 16 addresses fencing. We could add a statement that fencing along the southern boundary shall be staggered in height by 18 inches every 6 feet in length.
Not height necessarily, it would be staggered in depth and profile.
Oh, in depth. And how much depth do you want it staggered?
I mean, I want to do something that's reasonable, and I was thinking 18 inches, but it doesn't really have to. Ron brought up.
Let's just say 12 to 18.
Yeah, 12 to 18, just to give it a range.
Okay.
Yes.
So fencing along the southern boundary shall be staggered in depth by 12 to 18 inches.
And then also just, not to interrupt, just making sure that lot 15, that is an open fence as proposed, that it's never enclosed or made solid.
Okay. And the final map shall include a 10-foot easement on the southern boundary where development is restricted, and limit uses of garages in the CCNRs to placement of vehicles only.
Great. And could you explain that 10-foot easement one more time?
Well, I heard some discussion that there, along the southern boundary, that there might be some interest in restricting any future development there. If that's not a condition you want to include, then
I think it was about adding to the
Mr.
fence
Trent
height.
offered that they would grant an easement to the HOA of Sonesta that would preclude development in that 2-foot strip along the southern boundary on the south side of this proposed fence.
Thank you, Mr. Walter.
Is, in terms of the height of the fence, is that something that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, do we need to clarify that by every intersection, by every corner, that the fence height is limited to 36 feet for 15 feet, and that would be inclusive of any retaining walls that might be utilized? The maximum height is 36 inches.
yeah, we have a condition of approval that the fencing will comply with the development code regarding fencing and screening. So that's included in that.
And I think that a good point was made about the calculating height. So does it include or exclude retaining walls? So I think that my general opinion was that we really tried to limit the height to 6 feet, and if that includes a retaining wall, then it does. I have a 4.5-foot fence between my neighbor, and I have no problem with it, but
The current condition of approval for fencing further states that the maximum height of a fence, including a retaining wall, shall not exceed a height of 7 feet of solid material.
okay, but but we were trying to have at least just a 6-foot fence, so I just want to make sure that
Right, so the planning commission can change that if they'd like
yes,
to
I'd like
include that in
to see if we
their
can
motion.
change that, because I want to reduce the height of the fence. Ultimately, there'll be landscaping on the other side of the fence, and it won't matter, but I think in the short term, I think the height will matter to the neighbors as the landscape matures. So I'd like to see a condition added where we calculate that fence height, which includes any retaining wall, to no more than 6 feet in height. I believe that the retaining wall, based on our discussions with the developer, was that they would be probably no more than 2 feet. So we're talking a 4-foot tall fence over.
Do you want to require the top foot be a lattice? Do you want to require the top foot to be a lattice?
It would just be a solid, no lattice would be the maximum height, excluding lattice. That's a good point.
you done with your recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you, Randy.
Mr.
I have a question about the condition requiring parking only in garages. Is the point of that to discourage off-site parking? Or to discourage use of garages for, I don't know, maybe you paint, maybe you have a hobby, maybe you like to build things with wood. I mean, I for one, don't like that condition. So, I mean, for all the reasons I just mentioned.
It's not unusual in an HOA to require no parking on the street. A condo I own in Southern California has that restriction.
Well, these have garages and driveways, so I'm just curious why we're doing that.
I think I heard the discussion that there was a concern about bleed over into the neighboring community, and I thought that providing more space within the garage for cars, they're more likely to use your driveway. At that point, it would reduce the temptation to go elsewhere. That was all it was about.
To prevent off-site parking,
Right, onto the Sonesta Villas.
street parking.
Yeah, I mean, it'd impact too. Street, and then worse yet, if somebody had no scruples, and they would actually go on to the adjacent parcel.
Well, along these lines, as most of you know, I spend a lot of time every day walking in town. And there are some houses I pass in which the automobiles are always parked in the driveway. I mean, period. That's the parking space for the vehicles. And whether it's because of the garages are filled with stuff or being put to some other purpose, I don't know. But if people are in and out of their house 3 or 4 times a day and driving, they tend, from what I can see, to like parking in the driveway so they don't have to keep opening and closing and pulling out of the garage and so forth. So I think it's partly a matter of culture. I can't really imagine that somebody has so much stuff in their garage that they don't park in the garage and don't park in the driveway and pull their car around the block and walk to their car, because I barely see anybody walking in Sonoma as it is, let alone walking to their car around the block. So I don't really see it as a compelling issue. Setting aside whatever cultural concerns I have about the accumulation of stuff, which is clearly an issue. You should, look up George Carlin's routine about stuff. It's pretty, George Carlin, yeah. Don't get me started. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to hear a motion.
Well, I've got a comment first.
You just did.
No, I'm going to give you the comment I really want to make. When I first came to Sonoma, this is some 30-odd years ago, and got involved in planning discussions, the underlying guiding principle of everything the Planning Commission did, and ultimately everything the City Council did, was creating documents and a general plan and a development code that helped preserve Sonoma's sense of place. That was it. This was the mantra of the planning ethic that drove the creation of the general plan of the early 90s and the subsequent one in 2006. It was the recognition, which incorporated things like neighborhood guidelines and design guidelines. The underlying premise was there was something about Sonoma worth preserving, that it had a quality, it had a character, it had a je ne sais quoi, something you can't even necessarily put words to, but that you could feel, that you could sense when you came here. I owned a bed and breakfast here for 13 years. People would come from all over the country and stay at my bed and breakfast, and they'd walk around this town, and they'd go, wow, I really love your town. It still feels like a real town. And I was proud of that. And when I got involved in planning issues, working with this idea of sense of place was an exciting thing. Because first we had to define it as best we could. What was it that comprised this sense of place? What was the character? And we discovered that it varied neighborhood to neighborhood, that the sense of place in one part of the community, like the old part of the east side on 2nd Street East, wasn't the same kind of character that people seem to enjoy in a different part of town. And so we had to refine the process and look at it in a more finely grained way, that Sonoma just wasn't one thing that you could put on paper and quantify, that it was something that was nuanced. It was difficult to pin down sometimes. We did our best to do it and ended up coming up with town design guidelines by dividing various portions of the city and defining what was the character of those portions, how do we preserve it, and even more, how do we enhance it, how do we build on it. And this was it. And our general plan and the language in it and the non-objective language in it was all in furtherance of that. Now, the state of California has come along and decided that that's not good enough. There's a housing emergency, and towns that are using planning approval decisions to exclude some sorts of things, exclude low-income citizens, exclude low-cost housing, that somehow or other this was a terrible thing that was happening. And the legislature became convinced, not ironically, with donations and campaign contributions from a housing industry, excuse me, Trent, but it's the truth, to pass a variety of laws because of a so-called housing emergency. Well, I don't have to spend a lot of time saying that there's not a housing emergency in Sonoma. There's a housing affordability emergency in Sonoma, and that's the same problem in the rest of the state of California. If you have plenty of money, you can buy a house tomorrow. Sheila, I'm sure, would confirm that. If you have plenty of money, there's no problem. You want to buy a house, they're available. But if you don't have a lot of money in California, it's hard to buy a house. Now, in Sonoma, the philosophy when I was on the city council and on the planning commission and coming here 30 years ago was a community that was supportive of the creation of affordable housing. And we had redevelopment funds to do it with, and we built a lot of it. And it was a fabulous program, and I'm really sorry that Jerry Brown and the legislature deep-sixed the redevelopment agency funding, because 20% of that money was building real housing, and we had something to offer developers to say, look, we're going to join with you, we're going to put something on the table. City of Sonoma doesn't have a pot to put on the table anymore, not compared to what we used to have. But the genuine concern of this city to provide housing for lower income people still remains. And we are supportive of it. There's not one, this is contrary, I'll mention this to Mr. Generation H. In the history of Sonoma, sir, not one fully funded affordable housing project, I'm talking big A affordable housing project, has ever been denied in the city of Sonoma. Not by this commission and not by the city council. If it's had the money to be built, whatever the objections of the neighbors might have been, whatever quote-unquote NIMBYism might have occurred, that wasn't enough to stop even one affordable housing project from getting its approval in this town. And that's the history of the last 32 years. So the will of this community and the will of this planning commission and the will of the city council for all this time has been to encourage diversity of housing, to provide housing for people who are otherwise unable to afford it. And I am proud of that. And I'm only sorry that we haven't been able to put the money behind it that we used to be able to further that, because that's what's held us back. Now, the state of California has decided we have to use only objective standards. And this move to objectivity is essentially a reductionist materialism of the worst order. It is taking the nuance, that undefinable je ne sais quoi that I was talking about, that quality of compatibility, of character, of that of that uniqueness that a given city or a given community has, and it is wiping it off the table, along with the discretionary power of the Planning Commission and the City Council. I consider this to be a movement in the state of California towards an authoritarian way of governing, of deciding that people in Sacramento know what's best for everybody, and everybody has to do it the same way, which is convert all of this notion of character and quality and nuance to numbers. If you can't quantify it, it's not objective. That's what it basically comes down to. In brain chemistry terms, it's the imposition of the left hemisphere's desire to define and regulate through the use of absolutes the nature of reality, as if that's going to change the nature of human experience. But ultimately, this drive to objectify reality is a dehumanizing effect. Is basically saying we're an industrial creature, and it's imposing an industrial approach to what has been historically an organic development of communities from the heart. And it's a disaster, in my opinion. It's an absolute disaster. Accordingly, and I appreciate the effort that's gone into this, I'm going to vote no on the approval of this project tonight. Not because of many of the specific objections. In other words, I know that people are concerned about a two-story house. For ages, Sonoma has allowed a two-story home by right. That's just the way the code has been. If you own a one-story house today and you want to put a two-story house, you don't have to get any special permission. You just go in and ask for your building plan and conform to the construction codes, and you can put a second story on your house. It doesn't matter whether your neighbor likes it or not. That's the nature of living in a community. I'm not concerned so much about that. What I am concerned about is this dehumanizing process of basically removing the discretion of the democratically elected representatives of a community from determining the destiny of how that community will develop in the future. This is horrible. It makes David Storer's job somewhat irrelevant. It makes our job somewhat irrelevant, and it even makes the city council somewhat irrelevant. When you have a process where the planning department needs to determine compliance of a project within 30 days on its own, without any consultation with the Planning Commission and no input from the City Council, you have essentially removed democracy, local democracy, from the planning and land use decisions in the community. This is as bad as I can imagine it gets. Now, I consider myself a leftist, politically. But that doesn't mean that I think centralized control from a seat of government, a la the Soviet Union commissariat telling what you can build, where, and when, is the way that democracy should work in this country. And I don't think it should work this way in California. So as much as I appreciate the concessions the developer has made, and he has made some, and as much as I appreciate the arguments of the neighbors, some of which I understand completely, because development on a vacant site nearby is always going to be disruptive, my protest vote tonight, which I don't expect is going to change the law in Sacramento, and I don't expect is necessarily going to impact what the decision of this commission is. But I need to sleep at night. I need to go home and feel like I'm standing up for the principles by which I've lived both as a human being and as a member of this community for the last 30 some odd years. And I'm not comfortable saying to the state, oh yeah, what you're doing is just fine. Tying our hands and regulating the kinds of development and how it has to happen and the timing and the way it has to happen is just fine with me. I won't sleep well. I'll sleep better tonight knowing that I raised my voice. It's not going to go much farther than this room. I'm not kidding myself about that. But I'll set my head on the pillow a little more comfortably tonight knowing that I've said my piece.
With the goal of all of us going to bed tonight, I'd like to hear a motion.
I'd like to make a comment, because this is the only time I'm going to be able to do this. I feel very strongly about it. In fact, we have a group of people that are desiring some change in our legislation. I think it's very important that we work with the planning department and our city council on coming up with key fundamental definitions that are objective, that allow us to be able to do some of the things that you do. Ideas, for example, no single-family detached homes. That would be considered unutilization of a property, you know, like not having a minimum of common open space, like establishing objective standards so we can get those things that the community wants. Having a range of square footage, like a minimum of 20% has to be units of 800 square feet or less. So these are the sorts of things that our commission, our council, our consultants are going to be working on to, we're reacting to what Commissioner Barnett is referring to as a takeover from the state of California. And I want to remind the public, and I also want to remind the neighbors that have spent so much time looking at this project. If we didn't have a developer like DeNova looking at this project and coming up with this particular plan, we may not necessarily be as lucky, because the height requirement of that site is 30 feet. The standards and objective standards for our state legislation would allow a larger, much denser project. And I can assure you that that project would be absolutely nowhere consistent and compatible with that neighborhood, even if the whole neighborhood was 2 stories. I grew up in a town called South San Francisco, and the legislation that was passed by the state of California has destroyed that downtown. It has obliterated it, and it disgusts me. It disgusts my whole family. And this is absolutely one of the main reasons why I want to be on the Planning Commission, is to not let that happen to the city that I now live in. I want to say that I'm going to be voting for this project. I think that the developer has come before us and has made concessions. It's a good project. It's not the project that it can be, but it meets the code requirements, as I said at the last Planning Commission meeting. And I want to work really hard with the remaining developments lots in the city to work toward coming up with projects in the future that meet the intent of what the community wants, and that is more affordable rental properties that people can live in and afford. So I'm going to be supporting this project as conditioned by staff.
Any comments, please?
Very interesting meeting. I happen to agree with what Commissioner Barnett and Commissioner McDonald just said. I think I am also going to be supporting this project, not because I think it's the best project, but because I think, given the state of the law and both the state and the city, that they're entitled to approval of this project. I may not like it. I might want to change it. I might want it to be more units, smaller houses, what have you. They're within their rights to build what they're building. And if we want to have a different result on a different property, we need to do exactly what Commissioner McDonald just said. But it's going to take staff really getting on board with us to do this. I mean, we really need you to get on board with us if we're going to make this happen, because the sun is setting. There's not that much land left in this town. We need to tighten up, and we need to create the standards that we need to make these things happen. Smaller, denser projects that respect neighborhood as well. But we can't just, it just cannot be business as usual. I know you guys are overworked and understaffed, but we have to ask more of you, even more, because we have to pull together to make this thing happen, as we just heard. So, and I think this commission is willing to work on that. We have volunteered in the past to try to get involved to help, and I think that every single one of us would still do that. So I'm willing to support this project. I don't like the garage no, and I want that out. That's just not fair. Somebody likes to work in their garage, they should be able to do it. They like to build stuff or whatever they do in there. If there's a place to park their car and they're not out on the street creating problems, you know, maybe just put it in the CCRs that they have to park on the property.
Mr. Chair, if I can just add a quick comment to address Commissioner Barbossa's comments. We have a member, at least, we have the City Council Ad Hoc Zoning Committee, and I think from time to time, Chair Wellender participates there, so that might be something that he could convey to the ad hoc to support ordinances coming up with objective standards for design, whether it's in the MDR or other zones that the commission is interested in. That'd be something for him to be able to do.
I'll be brief, I promise. My 2 cents are this. I think that we really have very limited discretion with the approval or denial of this project. And I think that on its face, there's really no grounds for a denial. It also doesn't meet exactly what I would hope to see in a project. I share a lot of your concerns. I thank you for coming. It really means a lot. The thought, the effort, the time that went into you being here does a lot to help inform my decisions for issues involving planning. So thank you for coming out. That said, I will be supporting this, and I hope that you might join me in channeling your frustrations to where they rightfully belong with the state for reducing a lot of our flexibility and our ability to apply to this town what this town feels is important. Thank you.
I would be remiss if I didn't include you, Sheila.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Eucalyptus trees, I have a lot on my property, and I've had to cut all of them in half because they were falling and nearly killed some of our horses, so eucalyptus trees are dangerous. Garage, we don't need to reinvent that CC&R restriction. It's done with a lot of CC&Rs, so that one doesn't worry me. It may be that they park on, if they have a driveway space or whatever, but I think the key thing is making sure that there's not that blocking of the streets and of the neighbor's property. So I don't worry about that one. I know that we can totally face that one, and the verbiage is going to be out there. I want to echo what everybody said is we don't necessarily think this is the project that we want, but we also believe that with the HAA need for being objective and not denying a project unless we have very specific objective reasoning, we're being asked not to judge figure skating but speed skating. So we have to be as objective as possible here, and I think that you are well within the current rules. And I appreciate that these are smaller than Mockingbird. You know I'd like them smaller, and I would really like to see that happen in the future. I would also encourage all of the neighbors. You guys have really come out in force, and you've educated yourselves, and you've become so powerful. And I'd like to encourage you to continue that and help us get our development code a lot more objective. I'm on the Planning Commission because I started out like you guys, just working on these projects, working against some development that I really didn't feel good about, and I so appreciate you guys. I really, truly do, and I don't want to lose you. I want to encourage you to keep helping us. That's what we need as volunteers in Sonoma and on this Planning Commission. So I will be supporting the project with some reticence, but I'm going to go to sleep tonight on my pillow feeling like I have done exactly what we need to do here, with the hope that in the future that we are able to develop much stronger standards going forward, and with your help and with my gratitude to you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be a broken record. I'd like to hear a motion, please.
Before I do that, I would ask a couple of other considerations of conditions. Number one, I'd like a straw vote on the issue of requiring that the garages be reserved for parking. There's a variety of opinions. Let's get a straw vote on that so we can either include it or not in the motion to approve.
Can I ask a question of your question first, though? I am familiar with some HOAs where they don't, they, they limit the amount of time that a car can be parked out, but they don't preclude it being on the driveway. And it seems like building in a little bit of flexibility would allow for garage projects, whatever, but,
I'm really concerned about fine tuning that in the fashion you're suggesting. I can't believe the enforcement of that would be at all easy on
well,
the part of
it
the
falls on
HOA.
it would fall on the HOA's board.
True. Do you want to impose such an enforcement
Make a straw
problem on the
Yeah.
on the board of directors of the HOA? We have to have a discussion about this.
So,
I would not support a compulsory condition of approval to.
Okay.
Nor would I.
Mr. Barnett?
No.
I would too, but there's enough straw already.
Okay.
So that's taken care of.
A condition that was discussed but was not listed with the help of Wendy was the issue of landscaping the ditch to the extent feasible. Is that a condition you'd support?
I threw that out there, so I can't be a hypocrite, so.
That is something I would support.
I'd support that.
That's fine. I'm sorry there's no definition of feasible, but apparently this is an area we're allowed to be subjective.
Okay, so that sounds like an additional condition we could include in the motion. Let's see, I have a couple more here. The issue of the fence, I want to be really clear on that. First of all, it's to be solid, no lattice work on the top. It cannot exceed 6 feet in height, including the retaining wall in which it sits. It needs to be staggered, so it's not one monolithic plane by somewhere between 12 and 18 inches. It's to be of solid material, good neighbor fence. Anything else that I'm missing there?
I just didn't understand the unit 15.
Oh,
Oh,
the
the
lot
unit
15 is to be the same height, but not solid.
So it's to be like a wire deer fence, something
I
like
would
that?
imagine that's what is envisioned on the landscape plan. I just want to make sure it's enforced and that condition language would enforce that.
Okay.
Well, let me add. I hate doing this. Graphically, it's indistinguishable because what they're showing here and here and here, he has one graphic symbol for fence. So if you want something that's semi-transparent or transparent, that's fine. But unfortunately, as I read this conceptual drawing, where it got a little bit squirrely is when the fence was actually sitting on top of the retaining wall. That's where, so if that's something you feel strong about that you think would be a benefit, then we can fold it into a condition.
Well, I don't want to use this term, but now I'm on the fence. Sitting on the fence, but there's a trade-off, because if it is a chain link fence, you then has the visibility of the neighbor's backyard, which you may not like the junk that's in their backyard, since they, are going to be using their garage. So there's that trade-off. But then again, most of the times people will landscape their yards, and they don't want to look into a driveway either. So I'm just trying to a way so it's not so monolithic. It breaks it up a little bit, and it changes the material of the fence. So that was my intent. So
The staggering won't do that.
the staggering does partial breakup of the fence, but the change of materials from a solid redwood fence then to like a deer fence creates a different type of material, and it eases a transition so it doesn't look so long. But if my commission doesn't think that way, then that's fine.
Can you speak to the adjacent parcel there? What's there now?
If my topo map or the aerial map serves me right, is part of the development. It goes, it's part of Sonesta's driveway, and it turns into landscaping.
That's not what, This is not definitive.
Oh, no, I'm just basing that on all of the visuals I had in terms of if you can pull up one of those.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to help in it because I'm happy to find a solution. Thank you so much for letting me come back up. Where unit or lot 15 backs up to this part of the existing residences where there's already existing fencing. So I would prefer not to have to put open wire or view fencing back there since it's already some existing fencing to maintain privacy for our neighbors and the future lot or unit. But the part along the canal or whatever we want to call it, I'm happy to do or propose a partial view fence where it'd be 3 feet of wood and 3 feet of open wire above it, just to maintain some sense of security, but allow it to be open, looking out into that area. But on the south side, would prefer it to stay good neighbor if possible.
I think I would prefer a solid fence, given that it butts on really the units that are closest to a greater number of units that are actually closest to the property. There's not an egress channel or street between the units and property 15. They're right up, look like they're 20 feet from the fence, as opposed to having a road in between. So I think it should be solid.
Yeah, I apologize. I guess I was discombobulated. My objective was not, first of all, is to create a change in materials, but then also that is a sliver. Like it's like if you take you would create a backyard that would. I mean, could you just imagine fences going like this way? So I was.
On Google Maps, it's kind of like.
Yes. So I would encourage a deer fence that faces the channel. That way the
Excuse me, it's a canal.
Canal, channel, drainage ditch. I really wouldn't want to create this like dark void that you'll lose your dog in. I don't know. It's like anyway.
We've heard the commitment on the part of the applicant. I'd like to think if it's a combination of transparent, half transparent, half solid.
Yes,
that would be
fine.
workable.
Does that give you direction?
What more do you need, Mr. Walter? What any other conditions that you would like to add?
Yes, that the CCNRs would be drafted such that the HOA would be obligated to maintain the landscaping and the fence along the southern border of the property.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, in addition to the conditions that city attorney requested, I'd just like to remind you in the beginning of my presentation that we'd like to include the date of May 16th for the design review plans in condition 1A and the changes to the government code section in condition number 3.
Understood. So with that, knowing our limited ability to remember, I'd like to hear a motion that defers to staff to then read out specifically the conditions that we just agreed to, and we'll take a vote. So do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution approving the vesting tentative subdivision map for the project located at 19910 Fifth Street West, subject to the findings and conditions of approval that will be articulated by city staff.
Is there a second?
I'd like to second that.
Condition 1A revised to state the design review plans dated May 16th. Condition number 3 is modified to include Government Code Section 66452.6. To the extent feasible, the applicant will work with city staff to preserve the existing oak trees. We'll add the living area and total square footage to the conditions. Fencing along the southern boundary shall be staggered in depth between 12 and 18 inches. Final map shall include a 2-foot easement dedicated for Sonoma Vistas to
Preclude development.
preclude development. Thank you. 15 shall include an open fence design, not solid material, that faces the drainage ditch. Height of
the fence.
The height of the fence.
6 feet.
Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, sorry.
Gosh. The height of the fence shall not exceed 6 feet of solid material, including the retaining wall. The landscape ditch will be landscaped to the extent feasible, and the CCNRs shall require the HOA to be obligated to maintain the landscaping and, what was the other thing?
The staggered fence.
And the staggered fence.
Okay, there's been a first, a second, a reading of the conditions. I'd like to call for a vote, please.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Wyrick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
No.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes 5-1.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thanks. What's your phone doing?
No, it was my.
Could I offer a quick closing comment?
Oh, please.
Yeah, this will be quick. I know that staff and I would really appreciate it if you have issues with an upcoming item, bring them to our attention before the meeting. We only have 5 now, between the Design Review Committee, the Planning Commission, the City Council. There's very few here, and we can't burn them with going through things that are brought to our attention at the time of the meeting itself. You saw what happened at our last meeting, and had we had this information beforehand, we would have been able to address it with that particular commissioner or commissioners, whoever may bring it to our attention. So the extent you have these issues, please bring them to our attention beforehand, if you can. Thanks.
Very good. Items for discussion. I do have one, if nobody else does. I'll be brief. And this is, would like feedback from David and Jeff and Wendy and Matt. You heard up here that we have 7 warm bodies, would normally have 7 warm bodies that want to do whatever we can to assist in updates. And I know that the structure has been ad hoc-ish, whatever it is. I would like to ask staff and our city attorney to give some thought as to how we can better utilize the greater commission body in helping further this along more quickly. Of course, doing it in a legal sense, but I believe it was expressed verbally by several up here that we're willing to do it. And if there's some way that can be structured where we don't violate the Brown Act, we don't whatever, I would love to hear about that, possibly next week at some meeting. So that was my comment or discussion. Issues update.
Just a few things. Yeah, the City Council last night introduced 3 ordinances, one regarding timeshares, one regarding multifamily objective design standards, and then also the replacement, if you will, of the subdivision ordinance back to Title 16 where it was before the Development Code. So that was those will be adopted on the 16th. Excuse me. Yeah, this is the 15th of this month. That's right. Because the following night we have a planning commission meeting, which is my last comment, and that is your commission is familiar with 2 things that are out there in the universe right now. One with respect to the Springs specific plan and the draft EIR. At the meeting on the 16th, I plan on doing a presentation for you all about that document. It's about 11 or 1,200 pages. So I'm not going to be able to read everything. I had invited the county, but they're unable to assist us in making that presentation even remotely. They have a time commitment with their own processing and a planning commission meeting that same day that I'd requested that they try to help us out. But that notwithstanding, I'll do my best to provide an overview of what the specific plan itself says, along with the draft that accompanies it, which will ultimately be approved by the Board of Supervisors at some point in the fall. The second item on the agenda forthcoming on the 16th would be, I know Commissioner O'Neill's not going to be able to be with us, but I'll be making a presentation on the municipal services report that was to have been heard yesterday, but for a noticing gaffe that it's going to be heard at the meeting in July, the first meeting in July, the first Wednesday in July. I believe it's the 7th, but I could be wrong on that. But
We're not shut down.
pardon me?
I thought we're shut down in July.
Well, you all are as a commission, but I'll be attending that meeting remotely, I believe. But the point being is, I'll make a presentation on June 16th, prior to the LAFCO Now hearing the item, ostensibly for adoption by LAFCO with respect to adopting that MSR. Remember, that's your first MSR since 2006 that will, and I'll go into detail on that at the hearing on the 16th.
I have a question, though, on the specific plan. Were you being kind and expressing it the way that they couldn't do it because of the conflict on that date, or they're not willing to do it at all because it may be worthwhile saying, can we have a special gathering? Because this is not insignificant. And not to think that you could distill 1,100 pages down to maybe 5 minutes, but I'm skeptical.
I was being kind.
I thought you were. Larry?
This is a question for our planning director and our city attorney. It's come to my attention that some applications may be filed on parcels that are currently zoned a medium density residential with the actual RO zoning designation on it as well. And is there the opportunity for staff and the city attorney to review the underlying language of that zoning designation with an eye to seeing whether or not our subjective standards are in fact clear enough that we can get what we want out of that zoning designation, or do we need to pass an urgency ordinance in order to accomplish that if in fact an application is filed within the next few weeks? I'm worried that we're going to have exactly the same situation come up again, where an application gets filed that does not conform to the intention, because what the current language says is that this or that is intended, so forth. You know, what can we do to tighten up the language on any existing parcels on which an application is imminent, so that we don't end up in this same situation another time?
It's going to be difficult. Just the timing is, if it's 2 weeks away from an application, and it's a preliminary application that's submitted, it freezes the laws and the rules and the policies in effect when that application is filed.
And what does it take to bring an urgency ordinance before the council to tighten up the language so we don't repeat this exact same situation another time?
Well, I don't know what it would, I don't know. It has to come from the council and or the city manager.
If I could just play calendar for a minute, because
What parcel is this?
The one on Sonoma Highway.
Oh, the one that they're gonna get?
Yeah.
That one actually is zoned RO. And,
Yes, but is the language in our zoning ordinance subjective enough for us to actually get what we want?
Well, I don't know what you want. It requires a minimum of 15 units per acre. And if you want density, they'll
Well-
fit within that 15 to 25 range.
I don't have it in front of me. My concern is that if there's words in like the intent of this zoning designation is, as opposed to it, that you shall do this, then we're back in the same boat.
I don't think it's physically possible to have that happen in 2 weeks, particularly since we need authorization from somebody like the city manager or the city council to give us direction to do that.
Well, I'm assuming the city manager, given advice of the planning director, if upon his review of the language determines that there are important subjective language in there that needs to be objectified, as much as I hate that. Nonetheless, if that's what has to happen, if the planning director advises the city manager tomorrow, can we do it?
Calendar, talk to us.
here's the downside. I am the acting city manager for the next 7 days. But here's the logistic problem. I can talk to myself, do it all the time. Problem is, we've got 3 business days in which to write something, not advisable at this point. That, because the packet will need to be published. First of all, I'd have to write it with Jeff tomorrow or Monday at the latest in order to have it vetted through our process. Mechanically, I just can't see how we can get it done, even if we wanted to, in a perfect world, before the 15th, because the packet will need to be published on the 10th, which is our ordinary course of business. So I just don't see any way.
Well,
And the thing is, we're also dark in July. That's where the bigger problem comes. If we had the luxury, but even before the applicant submits, we thought it was going to be this week, right? It's not happened yet. Maybe it happens
did we
tomorrow.
not hear, though, and again, it's not in writing, but I thought we were told that there were going to be 50 units?
We did a study session on it. It
Yeah,
had 50.
yeah.
But we told them to reconfigure it instead of being, it's just completely different.
It had more to do with site planning than it had to do with density.
Yes.
So, I know, Larry, that's one of the concerns that we've had as a result of this project.
As I said, I don't have the language in front of me, so I can't say, you know, what's subjective in it and what's objective. My concern is that if we're trying to nail something down and we're using words that don't nail it down, then we've created exactly the same situation of wiggle room in interpretation, and I think we can all plainly see the way the game gets played, which is that the state law is on the side of the developer at this point, not the city. So I want to see us as well protected as possible. I understand the timing issue, but I can't think of anything more important at this point, given the knowledge that an application's coming down the pike.
Well, Commissioner Barrett, as you know, Barnett, rather, the developing objective criteria to supplant what might be subjective in our code is a process that really should be vetted by more than just David and Jeff Walter in a closed-door room and, you know, at City Hall in an afternoon having coffee together. I mean, these are important things that need to be decided by the community, by you, by the council, with due deliberation and consideration. So it's a process, and we just don't have the time to do the process, and you really don't want to have David and Jeff being the ones who decide what the objective criteria should be to apply to an important project along.
In a perfect world, I agree with you. But at this point, I feel like we're living in far from a perfect world. Essentially, the default position is as I've said, is in favor of the developer. And so while I don't like the idea of dispensing with a broader process, of course we should have a broader process. But if we run out of time, then it just becomes another area of contention that we have to deal with. To me, if the current language uses a word like should, which is what the city is intended to have happen, changing should to shall is not a big topic of discussion. I mean, if the intent is still there, and nobody that I know of has raised issues on the city council or anywhere else as to the impropriety of our expressed intents, the issue that's come up is our expressed intents aren't stated as subjective criteria. They're stated as objective criteria. They're stated too subjectively. So frankly, I agree with you. It's not perfect, but I'd rather have the two of you sit down and knock out the shoulds and put in the shalls, if that's what it takes, just to give us that much more. I'm satisfied that that's something I could trust the two of you to do, and it's not optimum, but the situation we've got, as far as I'm concerned, is far from optimum. At this point, we're behind the 8 ball, as the phrase goes. The city's the one that's playing catch up here. The developers have got the state on their side.
So my brain is is working in two ways here, in two tracks. Number one is, how do you do exactly what you said without that direction coming from the city council? That concerns me. And maybe we can make a phone call overnight and say, let's get 3 council members to tell David to do exactly what you said. Not optimum, not even the slightest. So that's one track where I feel uncomfortable going that route. The second track is, we don't know when that application will come in. It might come in Monday, it can come Tuesday before we even write something, even if we did get that direction from the city manager and the city council. They typically will provide direction. We have to put it on the agenda for them to tell us to go do something. I feel uncomfortable because we do have this track of the ad hoc, and that's how the process has worked, even for the urgency that we did for timeshares and some other things. The other track is, why don't we correct the process through a deliberative process that Jeff talked about, such that, yeah, we might not get it on the project that we're not talking about on Highway 12. That was what I heard at the last meeting, was let's correct the process so that it doesn't happen in the future. I just don't think we can work that fast to get this thing done that way between now and next week.
Can we fold then what I had just expressed earlier about we have a body of willing participants to assist in an understaffed planning department and overworked city attorney in terms of all of the many things, to try to provide as much clarity in the areas of ambiguity that have come up. That's where and we can fold what Larry has just said into that, and I recognize that time is not with us, but I really would be encouraged as the chair to know that we are exhausting the options on how we can indeed improve our development code in a fashion given the limited resources.
So again, not trying to be the wet blanket here, I'm trying to be a
The wet
realist.
blanket, I'm just going to call you on it.
Call me on the wet blanket thing. So, I'm now compelled to tell you about the things that are on our plate, because clearly, we've got residential component, no minor issue. We need to try to get that together for the 16th, along with some other projects. We're working on parklets. We've just finished 3 ordinances that have gone last night. We've got a housing element that we've got to break out. These are some significant things that are working with your small staff. To the extent that we could do something like this in a perfect world, I'd love to do it, because I think it takes that. We've done it for multifamily. We can do it for these other cleanups, if you will. The code needs a lot of work. It really does. We've said that all along.
Well, then realistically, then we know we're going to be shut down in July. Well, what I think we should do is between now and when we reconvene in the 1st of August, see if we can come up with some sort of process that you can draw upon our energy and input that will assist, because what has happened is that it kind of, it doesn't paint a bright light on either the commission or the staff, and we don't expect perfection. We should have never have expected perfection, but when we know we have things that we can tighten up, I just would love to hear a process by which we can take and make some progress on it.
And I think if we could get some direction from the city council, if that's what they want to have done, have us spend our time, that can come through the council to the city manager. And I think that could happen as early as the 15th. That's how we typically go through a process of putting things on a council agenda to provide that direction.
Well, I'll speed dial all the councilmen tomorrow morning if that's what it takes, but because I just know that if we aren't proactive about it, we talk about it, it ain't going to happen on August 1st. It'll slip into September. Next thing you know, we're going to be in the holidays. And I just think we need to do what we can. Again, we're a resource, and I just think right now we're being maximized as far as how we might be able to help, not necessarily cause more grief in your life. That's not our intent. So, anyway, I've spoken it. Steve?
Yeah, I just want to also encourage you, I don't understand why to even start changing shoulds to shall. You need the city council to say, go change it, prepare a draft and say, change should to shall. You can say, hey, we've always talked about this, and here, look, we prepared a draft emergency ordinance to close this loophole, and can we put this on the agenda? I mean, I don't understand why it can't go that way. I mean, we need to slam this door, and just leaving it open just doesn't sit right with me.
Is it it's an authorization of time usage, is what it is. So they need to seek authorization from either the city manager or the city council that says, even if it's an hour, or, is that not the case?
Yeah, the city manager is delegated the authority to assign tasks and to allocate work with the guidance and authorization of the city council. Those are the two important wheels in this particular machine that need to be oiled, and we need to be involved in this process. We just can't go running off doing work that we think's cool.
But didn't we just hear that David's the acting city manager right now? Well, so you talk to yourself. Check that box. Now call a few council members tomorrow and let's get going on this.
I think I've given myself the day off tomorrow, Steve.
Yeah. Dave's actually taking a vacation for the next 7 days.
I'd just like to bring up for Sheila and I, we're both going to be gone for the June meeting. I just want to make sure we have a quorum. Are four of you going to be here? Okay, good. So at least we have 4 people.
I haven't heard that Commissioner Willis will be absent. I just heard that he'd be absent.
He's in Dubai at the moment.
Right, that he'd be back.
Abu Dhabi,
Abu Dhabi.
Could be Istanbul.
no, Constantinople.
I'd like any more comments?
If it helps the discussion, we'll look at the language and we'll see how we can get us where we need to be.
Apparently one of the council members is already aware of this because they're watching the meeting and has given a thumbs up to this idea.
Tell that councilman he needs to get a life.
That works.
Yeah, tell him he needs to get a. I'll tell him, no problem. I'd like to have a motion, please, for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Everyone's in agreement?
Aye.
Thank you, Matt. Oh, I don't want to look. Don't want to look. I appreciate your speech.
Thank you.
Well, the one that you forced on me, it said that you wanted to speak on it again. I thought that basically speaks to